This meeting of CPDC to order, and I think I'm going to turn it immediately over to Andrew.
Sure. So thank you all for joining us tonight for the CPDC hearing of Monday, February 5th. This is our third public hearing session in relation to the proposed zoning amendments for compliance with Section 3A of the Zoning Act, otherwise deemed the MBTA Communities Act. I am Andrew McNichol, Community Development Director for the Town of Reading, and my peer staff with me tonight is Senior Planner Mary Benedetto. On the CPDC Planning Board tonight, we have John Weston, Heather Klisch, Mark Wetzel, Tony Diarezzo, and over Zoom we have Tarm Armstrong and Hillary Mative. So as you can tell, it's a hybrid meeting, a lot in person, a lot over remote. We're going to try to keep this up to the typical public hearing process, where if you have public comment, please raise your hand for the chair to acknowledge you. We'll be looking for those on Zoom. If you're on Zoom, please use the raise hand feature, or if your camera is on, just wave your hands around. We'll try to flag you down. For those in person, there is a sign-in sheet out front. If you happen to miss it, if you get a chance before you leave, please do so. On your first public comment, please state your name and address for the record. And otherwise, this meeting is being broadcasted and recorded by RCTV. So we should be ready to roll. I think tonight what we're going to do is start with a brief presentation to recap the initiative and the comments to date, and really we want to do that if my clicker would work. So,
before you get rolling, in this room, is there somewhere specific when people are making comment or asking questions that they need to be in order for folks in Zoom?
Good question. If you are in person, when you have a public comment or question, we're going to ask you to try to come up to the podium, because our Zoom mics are limited to this area only, and so for them to be able to hear you, we just have to be able to have you close to the mic. So we'll give the presentation, and then I can sit down and hop up as needed, and then you can join at the podium as well. So thank you. Good point of clarification. So our goal tonight is to really recap what we have heard so far, and so that we can look to establish the path forward with you all. I think there's been a lot of conversations to date, and we just want to make sure we're best understanding what we hear and how we get there in the end. So as I mentioned, we're going to start with that brief presentation, review the compliance process to date, how we got here. We're going to discuss the actionable feedback that we've heard from the public, both outside of the public hearings and in the hearings themselves, both in relation to the current proposal on the table and in for the request for additional areas for consideration. We're going to look at those alternate concepts a bit for exploration, the limitations of the law in and of itself. We've gotten a lot of questions, so we just want to try to address some of the things we've heard. We want to answer some of the most frequently asked recent questions. We're getting a lot of questions that we can try to quickly go over here today and tonight to hopefully be points of clarification for going forward, and then we'll establish the next steps with the board and with you guys. So we're going to jump right into it tonight to give a recap of the process. To step all the way back to the beginning, right? This process began, as many do, by reviewing data and trends so that we can best understand the issues at hand, both regionally and locally. As we know, this law was passed in order to address and prioritize what is the existing housing shortage that in turn has driven up housing costs to really unprecedented levels seen in recent times. So as we've shared all along, Reading has many paths to compliance with the MBTA Communities Law, but it is important to determine existing deficiencies as well as strengths so that we can find the room for the improvement that may be sought through this process. And that is really, all of this is really driven because existing policies across cities and suburbs and municipalities alike have been a bit restrictive and a slower approach towards housing allowances. And so the state is asking us to say, hey, we need to do a bit more to address this shortage. We would like you to work with us across the regional level for us to get there. And this is why it's important to recognize that housing policy is a regional issue, but the need really needs to focus at the local level because every community is different. And so when we looked at the data, we're looking at average home prices in Reading driving upwards, especially in recent years. We're seeing that the average household income isn't able to afford the average home price. Estimated 1/3 of Reading households have incomes at or below the 80% area median income level, meaning they can qualify for affordable housing. We're seeing cost burden numbers go up, especially in relation to rental households. Cost burden is paying more than 30% of your annual income towards housing needs. We're looking at housing stock here in Reading, right? We have single family, 2 and 3 units, 10 to 19, 20 plus units, really breaking down the stock to try to identify, right, where have we succeeded, where have our strengths been, and really maybe what has lagged behind a little bit. So we can see, right, when you do that deeper dive, you start to see in Reading's multifamily housing that's currently skewed towards larger developments with 20 plus units making up over half of Reading's existing multifamily housing stock. So we've shared all of this in the past. I just kind of wanted to do that little refresh because once you dive into locally, right, and understanding the deficiencies and the strengths here, you can start to compare it to the regional level to see what other trends and strengths have been working in other areas. Again, every community is different. Nothing's ever going to be apples to apples, but for comparison's sake, you can see that Reading is the yellow bars here and the state averages are the white. So Reading is far exceeding in single-family detached homes. We're doing pretty good in 10 or more units. As I mentioned, that denser development rate has been a strength of Reading. You've really pursued that in smart growth in other areas of town. What you can see is lagging behind a little bit is some of these in-betweeners, the 2s, the 3s, and 4s, maybe even upwards of 5 to 9 units. You can see, based on other trends across the region, Reading is lagging a little bit behind. So again, just context here of really kind of how we got here. So when we looked at the data, we said, okay, we're starting to understand strengths and weaknesses, but what we also really want to help inform our process is public participation. So we released a survey in June 2023 for general outreach to the public at large to really ask the concepts of housing and what typology of housing that Reading residents might find appropriate, what rate of development style, right, mid-rise versus smaller family versus these denser projects that have been seen in recent years. We really just wanted to, right, refresh the community. We've done a lot of housing development in Reading in the last 10 years. I think we've gotten 1,000 units in the last 10 years. So we wanted to take this opportunity to step back, get the concepts, get the ideas, get the feelings on housing in general, especially in relation to multifamily, and what might be more appropriate going forward. So when we released the survey, a user could select what the housing type and form they best fit for Reading, as well as the qualities of location where they feel that specific housing type that they chose might be appropriate. So the options in the survey range from 3 units, 4 units, a low-rise apartment-esque building to the mid-rise denser developments that you see downtown. And we asked characteristics and qualities around housing, both in form and in area, to try to get a general idea, again, of characteristics of housing that people might find appropriate. That way we could digest it and take it going forward into a zoning concept. So it didn't get into the specifics of setbacks, 10 to 15 feet, or we asked a few things on parking ratios and concerns as well, right? Massing, height, things like that. What's important to you, yard space versus parking, these elements, but really, again, focusing on the characteristics of form so that we can get an idea that when we write into zoning allowances, how do we try to promote what we're hearing from the public? So that survey was ran through all summer, and then from there, right, we were able to take that feedback and say, okay, let's work through this a bit more, let's digest this. We wanted to hold a knowledge series, a series of public events from September to November. I believe we held one a month. We started with educational forums to kind of, right, reinforce what this law was, what it meant for Reading, how it is that all of this came to be, and what the need is. We also held workshopping elements in these knowledge series. So you can see on this one, right, we held a design a lot to say, okay, if we're really, right, on the survey results and others focused on smaller housing needs and smaller multifamily, what does that mean on an actual lot? And how do setbacks and parking and dimensional controls all start to play a piece into the zoning and the built environment? So you can kind of see through this workshop that here on the left we range from smaller lots up to larger lots. Naturally, smaller lots have smaller building sizes on them based on allowances, and as you start to scale upwards into the multifamily allowances, it gets very difficult to squeeze all of those things that are required in the zoning onto a smaller lot. As you get increase in lot size, maybe there's a bit more room for flexibility of where that building could be. It could be pushed towards the right, the center, the rear, the front, all these things. It all just comes down to the lot size and the controls that we're placing to promote the forms of housing that Reading residents desire. We also wanted to run through a workshop of mapping events, right? The map has always been a big element of discussion. When we had discussed the map at large in this public event, you can see, right, ranges were wide. A lot of people were saying, why don't we go bigger beyond the half-mile radius? Why don't we focus within it? What if we try to shrink this down a little bit? Only about 7 maps of the 41 received included significant area outside of the half mile, but there were comments and questions of what could the commercial zones look like if they were to be included. As we kind of progressed, right, we felt that it was starting to reinforce the smaller housing scale, which naturally kind of started to push the commercial areas out. So all of this is really in essence to say and try to reinforce that the outcome and the proposal that's been discussed in the recent months since December was really the result of this iterative process based on research and public engagement. So I know, right, a lot of people in December, we had sent out that mailing. As soon as we finalized the map and the concept and everything we had been working towards, we tried to release that mailer to say, hey, right, we would like you guys to be aware and be involved in this process before everything starts to be finalized. So that's not a surprise on anybody. Again, this proposal was finalized in early December, and we tried to notify everybody within the map iteration of that time. And so that's, right, got in a lot of people's eyes and attentions, and a lot of people are trying to catch up to speed very quickly here as we try to roll on with the process. In the last 2 public hearings, we've received a lot of actionable feedback, which is great. We've gotten 2 kind of separate types of feedback relating to the specific proposal that is on the table today, and feedback that people are requesting additional areas of town to be considered for alternative options so that, right, we can put everything on the table and kind of digest what actually might be best here. So just to kind of start at that first point, revisions on the existing proposal, right, that we've heard through quality feedback and quality engagement. We implemented a new 25% landscape area requirement for any residential development in the zone based on, right, feedback and desire for open space, making sure that there is appropriate levels there. We were originally proposing to reduce parking. We've revised that to leave at the existing 1.5 ratio based on public comment on parking, and wanted to make sure that there's adequate supply without over-requiring. So we had come back up to the 1.5 level. We had produced a series of maps that started to scale downwards based on resident requests to try to see, right, what could this area look like and what would it mean if we continued to shrink this area down within the half mile, right? That was kind of the concept we were working through. We have recently increased setbacks and lowered lot coverage on larger lots ranging 15,000 square feet and up, because we've gotten a lot of comment on large lot potential under the current concept. There's only a handful of them. It's about 15% of lots that I believe are half acre or more, but we wanted to make sure we're addressing that, because if there's larger lots, there should be room to push those in a little bit, get separation, make sure there's adequate space on the site for all the needs that we've been working through. We've also recently removed the increased allowances for additional affordable units. That was a concept we were throwing out in the waters of, if we do want more affordable units, would we consider lot coverage? Everything we've done has been working to keep things in form and scale to what exists, so we heard that that might not be as desirable as it might be in other areas. We said, okay, that makes sense, so we'll take that off the table. When we've what we've heard on our existing proposal as well through the public hearing process is a lot of relation to historic properties. So we've gotten a lot of comment on historic properties and what this means for them. We just want to be clear that nothing about the law or any proposed zoning amendments will change or stop the existing historic regulations, both historical inventory through the Reading Historical Commission or the Historic District Commission. And our proposed map at the time does not include the local historic districts. But regardless, none of those protections were going to go away, but we certainly understand the concern. So in the short term, right, we've identified some potential opportunities to promote reuse of historical resources. They would just take some time to try to vet and implement. But in the short term, we would recommend working with the RHC to increase the demolition delay from 6 months to 12 months to town meeting alongside with any zoning proposal so that we can have that immediate protection back in place. It was 12 months before it had been knocked down to 6 months. We would just propose to bring that back up to 12 months for any historically inventoried property. We've also gotten a lot of questions on development potentially combining many small lots in a neighborhood to do a bigger development. And we certainly hear that concern and want to try to address it if at all possible. We've kind of toyed with the idea of can you restrict the combination of lots? There's a lot of legal questions in the way of that. It's actually never really been done before from what we can find and from what town council can find. So I don't want to jump too much into the detail on it, but I just want to note that we are exploring that option because we agree the concept, at least this concept, is to promote smaller units and smaller lots. So that's what we want to keep the focus on. So if there's a way to put limitations on that, we're happy to explore those options. The other thing we've heard, right, at least again in relation to this concept is, right, what would these forms look like? What do they actually look like in today's world in the built environment? We had wanted to start pushing towards a pattern book through our grant award, and a pattern book is really just a fancy word for design guidelines that you might find for zoning districts. Zoning districts and zoning language has never kind of prescribed the exterior form of structures. You go based on dimensional controls, height, setbacks, lot coverage, these things. But in terms of the architectural style, zoning has never really regulated that, and it still doesn't. But design guidelines are a tool to help you and an applicant and the public kind of set the vision of what you would expect for any type of area, any neighborhood block, any expectations of what the development we would like it to look like. So we had been working towards that through a grant opportunity to establish the pattern book so that we can gain a better understanding on the preferred forms, massing, and design elements that we would recommend to builders here and say, if you're going to do this multifamily unit, this is what we would like to see. It's not always going to be perfect, but at least we can give guidance so that they can get confidence, because if you want quality design, a strong pre-permitting process can really help accentuate that. So you want to try to promote that as much as possible and give everybody confidence both on the board side, the staff side, and the public side of what we're all looking for so that we can come to the table together and work towards getting through the process. So the pattern book could include diagrams, photographs, illustrations, all these elements to convey guidelines and recommendations, right? If you're at this height, maybe it's these setbacks. They're recommended and kind of discussion based. So that's what we are working towards. We'll hit the pause on that for a little bit. The other kind of feedback, right, that bullet point 2 that I heard we've been working through as we've gotten a lot of comment through the public hearing process is that location matters. Location definitely matters. And right, I think what we've heard a bit and what we've tried to digest is the idea of smaller multifamily housing units that are similar in scale and house-like in architectural design is not a bad concept. But the concern has been, right, should it all be in this area and in this geography, and what is the larger lot potential here? So we've kind of heard three alternates that we've tried to digest through the public hearing process that have been asked to explore more. The first being taking pieces of this mixed residential concept and spread them elsewhere throughout the town, so that's not all within the half-mile radius. The second option is combining mixed residential with a higher density area to potentially lower density allowances in the mixed residential, right? Right now we're at 22 units per acre. If we can use it in combination with maybe a business zone that allows a higher density, could that density come down across the mixed residential area so that, again, we're getting back to larger lot protection and allowances, and making sure that the unit capacity that is a focus isn't too high. And the third option that we've heard is to use commercial areas only, and what would that look like in the zoning bylaw to reach compliance and get housing in the commercial areas. So we'll dive into those in a second. I just kind of wanted to reestablish here and now, right, this is the current concept that's been on the table. This was the map from 2 weeks ago in January 2024. The blue was the proposed mixed residential zone. The pink is the existing single-family areas. So this is kind of what we call concept one, and it's the concept, again, that's been most heavily discussed to date and what we've been working towards. We are happy to start exploring some of these alternates in a bit more detail if after tonight's discussion that's the findings. So that alternate A, we called it, right, mixed residential downtown across town. The general idea of what we've heard is take the percent of the proposal that does not need to be within the half mile. It's about 50 to 60%. And if we could instead insert it in places across the town that meet some of our other goals and criteria, like walkability to school, parks, amenities, commercial districts, where else could those areas exist that we could say, hey, maybe this would be a good use and form for those areas as well? Right, immediately that comes to mind, there's a few areas, Salem Street as a corridor out to REI. That's a lot of two families that exist down that corridor already. Direct access to the Rotary. There's commercial there, there's walkability there, Wakefield connections as well, and downtown to a degree. Near Wood End School and Home Goods and other school complexes, right, immediately right in and around those areas, could we promote a bit more housing to get walking to school and open space? Near the high school, like I mentioned, what about by Caloresso's Market? Nice little farm stand down on Main Street. The roads are a little small and narrow and sidewalks aren't too dominant down there, but if there's potential there, we're happy to look at it. So all of that, right, our district controls were designed for S15 lots, so moving outside of the S15 zone and branching out isn't totally infeasible. And we would just have to work to make sure that the controls do make sense in the law compliance, but also what could change in terms of maybe minimum lot sizes or density, if anything, and how could that really play a role outside of these other areas in town. Alternate B, we call it, right? Big buildings mixed with big buildings. So again, combining this residential concept for smaller multifamily allowances with a higher density district, call it 4 stories, mid-rise buildings, that could potentially allow lower density across that mixed residential, as I explained. We're at 22 units per acre right now. Could that come down to 15, 18, 20, right? We could try to model that and see if that works. This idea directly responds to the concerns that we've heard that allowed mixed unit counts are a bit high in the mixed residential zone. So we would ideally be looking at combining it with Business A, which is South Main Street, or pieces of the industrial zone in that concept. So initial thoughts were that, you know, this is actually plausible and creative, and we would like to explore this further. It just would take the most amount of time and effort, but again, happy to do that if this conversation starts to evolve that way. C is all commercial, rather than zoning to incorporate smaller scale multifamily into the residential neighborhoods and integrating them into existing forms and neighborhoods. Would we zone for larger, denser buildings across all of our commercial zones, or at least Business A and the industrial combined would be needed? This proposal would still have impacts to directly abutting single-family homes. We want to keep that in mind if this were to move forward, as every commercial district, either at its rear or its front or its side, abuts single-family uses, because that's the most dominant zone in town. But this proposal could essentially convert what is our limited commercial area, we have about 5% of land zoned for commercial, into fully residential. So I want to make that obvious and clear from the onset of this type of concept, that you just be allowing housing by right in the commercial zones. There are a range of heights and densities that we could look at for compliance in commercial zonings, and then what is the priority in that design and allowances. Would we look further to incentivize mixed use through higher controls, higher densities, maybe an extra story or two? Anything like that in concept is what you'd be looking at to try to promote mixed use or age restricted or higher affordables, things like that. And if you're looking to minimize the area in the commercial zones, are you maximizing the building size, or vice versa, spread it out across these business zones, and maybe you can do some lower thresholds that way, but it's more commercial space. So all of that is on the table. Before we kind of do a deeper dive into those in conversations, we just want to be upfront about some of the limitations about the law in relation to these concepts. So mixed use can only be required in eligible locations where existing village style or downtown development is essential. Right, we would consider that definition as our downtown. So all of the other areas, business A or industrial, we cannot simply require mixed use only. We would have to have multifamily as its own separate use and mixed use as an allowed use as well, either at the same rates, higher rates, lesser rates, right? We can walk through that iteration. But in the end, we just can't require mixed use only in business A or industrial. Affordable housing. We had a lot of questions on affordable housing and what it means, and what it is, what it means, how it's regulated, how it works. MBTA communities is not an affordable housing law. There's some strict limitations on the affordability requirements that you can do within a zoning district for compliance. So the law says you can do 10% requirement of affordable units by right. You can look to economically study that and try to get up to 15 to 20%. We haven't seen any community get past that 15% threshold, but they do write that in that you could get up to 20%, but in no case will they go beyond that outside of existing 40R districts like Reading's downtown. So to put a requirement of more than 10% of units, you have to pay a consultant to run that study, run that market analysis, and demonstrate that a variety of housing options can be feasibly developed at the affordability levels, right? And even that 15% threshold has been tough for some communities to hit. Those allowing 6 stories of development are getting limited to that 15%. Anything lesser than that, it gets a little tougher, but we'd be happy to explore that option should it come to be. We do believe that, right, in certain areas that have been asked for review, that we could rezone some of them locally outside of compliance needs and get to 20-25% affordability requirements. That would be a major win for the town in those areas, because those higher thresholds just not just are more affordable units, but have this whole impact to the subsidized housing inventory that we could get into. I don't think we will tonight, but there's strong reasoning to try to get to that 25% affordability threshold. There are other areas like South Main Street that, if we're going to consider them for compliance, we feel that a 10 to 15% rate is actually feasible in those areas and would be promoted. So the other limitations of the law is neighborhood scale. We get a lot of questions of why can't we zone over existing multifamily developments and things that the town has already done, right? Like I said, you've done a lot of high dense multifamily housing development. The law has this requirement of neighborhood scale where you cannot zone over a single development site where you're willing to permit a particular multifamily project. And for Reading specifically, that has some drawbacks, right? Because a lot of the multifamily development on the edges of town, Reading Commons, Reading Woods, Gazebo Circle, they're all single tract development parcels. So if you did want to rezone over them for compliance sake, you're still talking about some sort of sub-districting element to get into and expand into the single family zones that do directly abut those parcels, those single development tract parcels. So there's limitations there on zoning over existing multifamily parcels that are of nature like this. We did in our current iteration, just to let all know, right, we've tried to capture as much multifamily that the town has done. The Reading Village 40B was in the map, Reading Housing Authority properties were in the map, South Main Street multifamily properties were in the map. So we have looked to capture what the town has done in the current iteration, and we're happy to continue on that train, right, to try to help out, right, the rate of development that we might see here. And that's kind of gets into the next conversation of zoning capacity versus propensity to develop. So we get a lot of questions on zoning capacity, and while it is important for consideration, it's really not indicative of redevelopment rate and potential, which as staff is really kind of our focus of what's the pace of development that we would expect in any zoning district, and how quickly and how many units could come online in a period of time. So zoning capacity is really not a potential build out. It's not really addressing true need of the community or balance and harmony of a zoning district. So I would suggest that we do, rather than focus on the numbers, if we can help it, try to focus on outcomes, health, and longevity of any zoning concept that we do work on going forward. So again, zoning capacity is not a build out projection. Under current conditions, all zones in Reading and all municipalities have zoning capacity, because it's just an analysis of what could be built by right. In considering any proposal, the likelihood of development, again, is what we want to try to keep in mind, because that's what has, right, the impact to the built environment, to the unit counts, to the influxes of units. Those are the things we want to try to track and make sure of. We've been getting a lot of questions on what is an overlay district and why is Reading not using an overlay district. So in zoning, there are two kind of base elements in terms of district drawings and bylaws, and right, one of those is underlying zoning, as it's called. Base zoning is the more appropriate term. Base zoning in Reading is all of those districts, the single family 15, single family 20, single family 40, business A, industrial, etc. All these kind of terms that you might be a bit more familiar with. Those are your base zoning districts. An overlay is simply an additional zoning that sits on top of that base. And historically, overlays have always been used to have different prescriptive requirements for specific areas, or for areas that span multiple zoning boundaries and base zoning districts. So you think of like your floodplain, or those of you that might live in the Aquifer Protection District, those are all overlays that kind of imply onto those areas of further requirements if you have a proposal to increase floor area or additions or anything like that. An overlay is really just, it's a tool. That's what it is. And so, right, we've tried to make this comparison. You might consider your base zoning a shovel. You might consider an overlay your rake. Not all jobs require the rake. So more often than not, the shovel is going to be used sometimes in most projects. So it all kind of depends on where this process starts to get and what the outcomes are desired. So if an overlay does make sense because it spans S15, A40, business A, all these elements, you know, we'd be happy to consider that. But in essence, right, the current proposal is written into base zoning, and even if that were an overlay, nothing would change. It would just really be the format of the bylaw. It's really, again, the tool and how it's written into the bylaw. So just wanted to make that clear because we get a lot of questions. A lot of towns recently are doing overlays. I think that comes down to bylaw formatting and how it fits in. But overall, right, as soon as we can start getting the concept forward, we'll pick the best tool for the concept. Comparisons with other towns and cities. We are very well aware of what other towns and other cities are doing for their compliance districts and their needs. I just want to kind of strike that comparisons in the zoning is very tough to do, and comparisons to these communities can be very tough because this year alone there's 129 communities that are about to try to pass zoning compliance for MBTA communities. Every town and city, right, even those rapid transits that just got their zoning compliance done, everybody's existing zoning bylaws are different, everybody's housing stocks and demographics are different, everybody's existing parcel sizes are different, everybody's goals are different, their economic conditions and what they allow for and write in and what they would like to see in their own communities, right? 6 stories versus 4 versus 3 versus house-like, all these different needs, right? They are widely varied across every different municipality. So it gets very difficult to try to compare zoning from one municipality to another. Of course, right, if we're working on a concept, whether that's this small architectural house-like options for multifamily housing or mid-rise development, we are going to look at other municipalities and see what the strengths are in their creative language and their allowances to try to pull from and use what works. But I just want to kind of like set that scale. Like we got to focus on Reading, right, and what Reading's goals and what Reading's needs are. And so what Lexington, Wakefield, Andover, all these other communities are doing is helpful on the regional scale and context. And that's what we want to see is variety in allowances across the region so that things can start to get back to normal conditions, quote unquote. But it is very difficult to compare. Priority development areas, right, come up in a lot of discussion in terms of allowances and where we should be focusing zoning districts or even housing options. So in 2015 to 2016, we, in Reading here, finished the Economic Development Action Plan, laid out a series of priority development areas seen on the left here, with varying goals and concepts for each district. So downtown was up over here, 1A, 1B was actually what is now the Reading Village site. This is South Main Street, Business A zoning, and over here is your Market Basket and Walker's Brook Drive industrial area. Right, it feels like a lot of what we've heard is nothing's happened in Walker's Brook Drive since this plan happened. How can that be? What's happening? Why aren't redevelopment happening there? Since the plan was completed, right, we had immediately finished this expansion of downtown zoning district in 2017, immediately got an influx of projects that we were working through and looking to understand and make sure they were properly achieving the vision and the goals laid out. We then immediately looked to South Main Street, Priority Development Area 2A and 2B, looked to allow mixed use there. In 2019, wrote the mixed use bylaw, went through those zoning amendments for a year-long process, trying to establish what that could look like. That was done in 2019. We all know what happened in 2020. Things hit the brakes. There's a large-scale stoppage in terms of life in general. We did do a visioning exercise for the Eastern Gateway, which is Priority Development 3, now been termed the Eastern Gateway. We did do that visioning exercise in 2019, early 2020, to start floating the ideas of concepts of what redevelopment could look like there. That again got the brakes stalled after the COVID pandemic. In 2021, we were asked to go back to downtown, revisit that zoning, see how we could improve it, more adequately achieve what the vision was for open space and landscaping. So I just want to stress that, especially in the town meeting format style, that these things take time. There's a lot of work that goes into zoning allowances and zoning considerations, and I think we all in this room would agree that the industrial zone in Walker's Brook Drive is certainly deserving of redevelopment and brightening up the area. So again, whether that's in compliance with MBTA communities law or not, we can have that discussion, but I just want to note, nothing's been taken off the table, especially in the EDAP. It just takes time, and they should take time, because now you've seen the changes to downtown and you can use those to adequately inform other areas and all of these things. So I just want to stress that, right? We've been working towards all of these things, right? We get a lot of comments and questions on them, and we're happy to take anything into consideration. So that's kind of starts to lay out the framework of where we're at. So we have our current concept of mixed residential around the town center. That was the map that you had just seen a few slides ago. We can start looking at mixed residential all around town, option A. We can start looking at mixed residential in conjunction with higher dense areas like commercial zones and mixed use and mid-rise development. And we could, if truly desired, start looking at fully commercial district compliance and what that would mean for the town. I think at the last hearing 2 weeks ago, we had kind of set some of the floors, like we were modeling them very quickly, but there's a lot more work that needs to go into those things to make sure that everything would be in working order. But I guess if we want to fully explore any of these alternatives, we will not be going to April town meeting, which is, I think, what we're hearing and starting to consider here. So I guess the question that I'm going to pose to the board first and the community as well is, do we want to move forward with testing any of these considerations? And if so, which ones? Do we want to try to fully vet all of them? Are there ones that we know might not be as desirable as others? And then we can maybe start getting into the nitty-gritty of each one. So that was it, kind of setting the stage. I think we just want to use tonight as a conversational piece to kind of identify those next steps and, where we should be reviewing information next and how that process will look. And that was a lot.
Thank you.
So.
You can take a breath. That's good. I'm going to ask the board for some input, and then we're going to open it up from there. Okay.
Can I just ask a quick question regarding that? It's really quick.
Regarding what?
Regarding the town meeting, regarding town meeting. Do you know when the warrant article has to be finalized for the April town meeting? In other words, if we want to get a zoning district proposal in front of town meeting in April instead of November, when does that have to be finalized by? That was my question.
Yesterday.
So yeah, the question is when the town meeting warrant needs to be finalized, and the question is, the answer is if not tomorrow, which we would stress to try to do, that's when the draft warrant is being reviewed, it would be the end of February. I just don't think that we would have all the data and expectations that these type of districts would, that if we're looking at them for full consideration, we wouldn't have them in 2 weeks' time. So each iteration takes multiple weeks just to run through and draw the district and model and identify the true controls that are needed, the public engagement process, right, to make sure everybody kind of agrees or is aware and can build confidence. So it just wouldn't be possible in the 2 weeks' time to fully vet these 3 additional concepts to get to April town meeting. So I think, right, as staff, we're open to looking at these further and can certainly not be at April town meeting. It just means we either come back in the fall. So.
All right. Anyone thoughts before we open it up? Concerns, questions?
Sure. One of the things I'd just like to say is, I know how much effort it is to look at this, and it really is, in addition to looking at what our goals in the community are, and that's how we started, was we did a survey. We know what type of town this is, what type of community it is, and what we want the town to be, but we also realize we've got some statutory requirements we need to meet, not just from the state, but also from our town zoning requirements. And I know to look at each one of these options, it's not just drawing lines on maps. There's a lot of math that goes into this, because it is, looking at density and number of lots and trying to comply with the law. So it is a pretty complicated process to go through this. And then, and we've gotten a lot of feedback at the previous meetings that it's hard to visualize. Say we went with concept A. It's hard to visualize, if I live on Woburn Street, what that means to my neighborhood. And if you start driving around town and look at some of these types of developments, you realize a lot of them fit in. There's been a lot of 2-family, 3-family, 4-family developments on existing lots, or where they've taken existing buildings and converted them, and they really do fit into the neighborhood. And that's part of the goal here, is how do we make sure all this fits into the neighborhood. And then also from being on the board for about a year now, The big buildings aren't popular in town. There's a lot more issues related to traffic, stormwater, infrastructure, visual impacts, impacts on the abutting neighborhoods or the abutting neighbors. So I think that it sounds good to have it all zoned in the commercial industrial zoning, but that has impacts, number one, on our tax rate, because now you don't have the commercial development that's contributing, and you also end up with a lot of buildings that don't really fit in with Reading. We're going through that with some of the projects that are on the plate right now to be approved. So I think from whether we go to town meeting in the spring or the fall, I think that you're going to get a lot of these types of questions at Springtown meeting. So we need to make sure we've got all the bases covered and we can answer all those. It may be a good idea to postpone the vote until the fall and do maybe more of an education to town meeting members. And I don't know if they're allowed to do presentations at town meeting, but just to get more people to understand. But the downside of that is if it doesn't pass in the fall, what happens?
So we have to have compliant zoning by the end of the calendar year, and whether that's the special town meeting or November town meeting, subsequent town meeting, we can kind of figure that out as we go. But if you don't pass it in at least by November, you're likely to lose all your grant opportunities. You're going to lose state funding. Your housing authority is going to lose funding. You could face litigation from the state, most definitely. The AG has made that pretty clear twice now on the record. So there's a slew of impacts if you don't comply, as well as just the other side of trying to address the need of Reading and where we can build strength and opportunity.
Others?
Looking at me? Why are you looking at me?
I'm just waiting my turn.
You may certainly go.
Tom or Hillary, let us know if you want to.
So I guess, you've done it both in all a lot of good work. We've had a lot of good input from the community in these hearings that we've had, and also just in other formats. And this is, the way I view this, is an important decision for the town. I mean, this isn't just one, right? Typically, we're focusing on one or two parcels. This is a significant decision, and I feel like although I really do think that the proposal that was put together is a solid one and is could be right for the town. There's enough question about what else could be done that I guess I don't feel like we're ready to make a decision yet. I don't want us to get in that analysis paralysis point, but I think there is really some, as you laid out there, some themes that kept coming up in comments, and I think that we're just doing a disservice if we don't run those comments down to a proposal to see how they can work, and so that we at this board aren't really making the decision on what the town does, but really put that to town meeting.
I agree.
And so, I think all A, B, and C, which I really like the way that you
That was Mary. Yeah. Okay.
put that together. But there are pieces of each of those that I think provide some, that we could dig into and really see what happens. Whether I would hope, right, that if we run all the questions down for a fall town meeting, that town meeting would be ready to make a decision, and and hopefully approve something, or, right, honestly, right, there's, as we've heard many times, right, there may be a decision to consciously say no, not because we didn't present, what I don't want that decision made because we didn't present something that was good, but if that's the way that the town goes, it's because they just don't believe in the concept to begin with. So that's sort of where I am.
All right. I should probably, do I need?
You have Zoom mics
Microphones near me?
You're good.
You're good.
You can just speak loudly enough so those in the back.
Also, the amount of work that you've done is just tremendous. I also tend to agree, now that we have even greater engagement and greater feedback, exploring these options and possibly ending up with, and what's on my mind is that we need 43 acres at an overall density of 15 units per acre, and ideally carrying the spirit of the town and multiple other principles that we might have in mind. So what's on my mind is potentially ending up with a mix of places that add up to that 43 acres. A couple of thoughts on option A. The areas to explore seem good to me. I'm wondering if we also want to vet not just the mixed residential concept that has been floated in different areas around town, but where there is, say, an existing, I think it's a business district up at that Home Goods intersection, where there's a couple of good chunk, decent-sized parcels of land, not just a single parcel of land, is considering not just mixed residential really kind of mixes me up as a concept, not just multifamily, but also allowing mixed use, which is a combination of residential and commercial, and thinking about that mix throughout. One thing that I kind of want to point out is that none of these options include changing our downtown smart growth district, I think, and I want to make sure that that's, by intention, and so that's my understanding is that what we have in the downtown smart growth district, the overall density doesn't get us there. So, this is, if somebody thinks, oh, we should be going back and exploring the downtown smart growth district, which town meeting 18 months ago, 2 years ago, really reduced the density there, and I should say increased the restrictions so that what we have now can't comply with MBTA communities. If that's all good with everybody, good, but I just want to point that out. And then I have a question.
Yeah.
And the answer is not going to change my mind about supporting vetting some of these options more. But if town meeting in November votes on something, accepts something, and then we learn that it's not compliant with MBTA communities, what happens then? Or how do we avoid that?
So there is a pre-approval process through the state we'll be working with consultants that will be sure to be modeling any zoning district and controls that at least achieves minimums of the law specific to Reading. The floor amendments can get a little trickier, right? Floor amendments, we certainly want to have those discussions at town meetings, but density and setbacks can start to play a role into the compliance modeling. So that's again why the strong engagement process for us to hopefully build confidence in the proposal, so that if and when it's at town meeting, it's at least everybody's familiar with the concept enough to have the discussion at large. But for all intents and purposes, whatever we bring to town meeting will be a compliant district or districts.
So, follow-up question, to bring something to town meeting in November and getting the pre-approval, what's the time frame for having a proposal ready for pre-approval?
The state recommends at least 3 months in advance. I think they say they can take up to 90 days for pre-approval process. You can try to poke and nudge them. I will assume that many towns will be in our place in November, and they'll be quite busy with pre-approval processes. But we would hope by late summer, early fall, maybe we could submit concepts, a concept or two to them for pre-approval.
Okay, because I'm just thinking, town meetings in November, always around Thanksgiving. If we could ever do anything about that, I'd appreciate it. But we haven't. And so the warrant probably closes about
September-ish, mid-September.
September-ish.
Yep.
And 3 months before September is August, is actually like June. So,
Yep. So it's again an expedited timeline. You know, I think for our sake, right, we would try to bring proposals, one proposal for each concept that we think meets what we've heard, right? Where there's been many towns that have had 12 different concepts or 20 different concepts, and it could be option 3A, 3B, 3C, or 4A, 4B, 4C. We do want to try to propose something strong and confidence building, and to get into, even we as professional staff, right, we read through Lincoln's or others' concepts and how many iterations they've had, and we can't even wrap our minds around it. It's mind-boggling, and so we do want to avoid that many iterations of zoning concepts if we can help it. So hopefully through your feedback and the board, we can at least start to identify those key priorities and criteria for any and all of these concepts that we can then bring forward and say, this is pretty close to what we've heard. And can we flush out the finer details?
thanks, Andrew.
Tom, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Let's see, for the audience, I'm an alternate on the CPDC. That means I can participate by comments, but I would only vote if there's an absence of one of the members. Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong in this, but I think if we go outside the circle, the area of multifamily has to be 5 acres.
Correct. There's a minimum district size of 5 acres and the 15 units per acre in general.
Right. So when we get to, I don't believe this was intended by your multifamily residential all around town, to the extent that that puts the circle around the entire town, I would say no to that. If, on the other hand, there are a few areas of 5 acres or more that are worth looking at, I would not have a problem with that. I would only have a problem if we're ultimately looking at 5 or more. I mean, we need to get it down to a small number where we can alert the local residents so they can participate in the communications with us. And then we've got to identify what those 5 or so acre areas may or may not be. I think that's just my general comment on this. But I want to hear what the public has to say.
Hey, Tom, I hear you.
I thought Hillary had raised her hand.
I think she did. I think Mary's trying to unmute her.
Can you hear me?
We
Yeah.
can.
Yes. I am in agreement with what the previous members of the board have said. I think it's a good to go back and kind of explore a couple of these other options that have been brought up in our other meetings. My moment of pause would be to lose the momentum that we've been really, focused, and we've been really engaged on getting these community meetings. We've had some wonderful discussions. I would like to keep that momentum going and not put that part on pause.
I agree. I don't think we would completely reset our engagement process in terms of like a new survey and some of those elements, but we do certainly want to continue with like the educational series or workshops for anything that we are proposing that way, right? And I'm going to ask you, you're all probably in this room, maybe because you're in the map, maybe you're not, and those on Zoom, but please do stay engaged, right? This is going to come down the pipe sooner or later, and the stronger process we have with your involvement, again, the more confident we can feel in whatever proposal we bring forward. So I just ask that you stay involved, stay up to date, and just continue to work with us as you have been, so.
Andrew, if we're not bringing anything to town meeting in April because it's not ready, I still think we need a minimum 10-minute just overview so that everybody at town meeting is aware of what's going on and becomes engaged and is prepared for a vote in November.
I agree. We've asked for that. I think that's going to be an allowance from what I've heard, that we can do a quick presentation to town meeting, right? I think there's a new town meeting election upcoming in spring. Maybe there'll be some new members. It just makes sense to try to get in front of all of that and say, here's been the process to date. Here's what we're working towards. Again, please stay engaged and be aware that this is coming to you. So I agree, and I think
My
that's
recommendation is aim for that 10 minutes. After 10, people start to zone out.
I'm with you. I can try to do that. There's a lot of context here. Any other board comment or question maybe before?
Well, I'm embarrassed that I can't remember this, but all these town meetings start to blend together sometimes. But if you're able to do a presentation and keep it to 10 minutes, is there also oftentimes the allowance at town meeting for town meeting members to ask clarifying questions, to not opine, but anyhow.
I would have to defer to the moderator.
Yeah, maybe we could ask the moderator for like a time certain amount of questions, just again, to keep that momentum up.
Right. I agree. It would be nice. It's just how that's managed and not getting too nitty gritty if they could help it. But yeah.
So, I don't think there are any other questions or comments to the board right now. I guess, what would be, Andrew, what would be most helpful, given that you've heard what we had to say? I mean, I think it feels like we're probably not gonna recommend from the board to bring something to town meeting. I really don't want to have a conversation about diving back into, at this point, right, at 8 o'clock right now. I don't want to necessarily dive down into the proposal that we have on the table. I think that might be another meeting.
Yep.
I'm guessing that you're not all that prepared to talk about the other concepts in detail, right? So what kind of questions or comments would be helpful to sort of, to move the process along?
I think what we would like to do is try to understand, is there certain criteria for any or all of these concepts, or in a similar vein, should the ask be, try to keep it to the bare minimum compliance numbers, or do you want to see the full incentive package if it's commercial zones? Do you, mixed use allowances, or do you really just want to focus on compliance sake at this point for any of these concepts?
Yeah, I think we're trying to gauge how compelling each of these alternates is. If all of them are compelling, if people feel strongly about one or two of them. As has been brought up several times by you all, we have it's a timeline issue ultimately, how long we have to investigate all of these. Realistically, every concept will take us at least a month from start to finish, from we're looking at it to we can give you a handout on it explaining what it is and that it complies. So if you want us to investigate all three, that's at a minimum 3 months, before we can come back with full information for the public to be able to do a comparison of them. We can do that. We're happy to do it. But that'll be, May or June.
That's May or June. Yep.
Which we gotta get cranking on the public
is
hearing
it
process.
necessary to go through the four concepts in that level of detail, or is there, and I know we've looked at some general ideas of what these different concepts would look like, but some of them are, without going through all the details of how would you do it, how much density, how many lots, things like that. What are the advantages and disadvantages of doing concept B compared to the other? And sometimes that fleshes it out. You might get down and eliminate one or even two of those and make it easier to go through the details of looking at all the options.
Yeah, I guess we would start in reverse order there. And is the board or public truly willing to say that in business A and industrial will allow multifamily housing by right. And start there. Do we truly want all commercial districts to be involved with compliance, and kind of set that floor?
I think in answer to your question, Mark, also, I think the iterative nature of the testing is what takes up the time. And you have to do all the combinations of testing until you land on the best fit based on our current zoning, and then what is kind of the ideal outcome for each district based on all the existing parcels. And that's kind of what eats up the time. And then thinking about how to actually implement that into our zoning, to think about those decisions and if it's practical. And that level of detail is kind of necessary to have the conversations.
What I was thinking more of, and I'm an engineer, I'm not in zoning, but when we're looking at engineering alternatives, we kind of say, okay, here's alternative A, B, C, D, and here's what's good about A and B and C and D. And so, in other words, instead of looking at, for instance, in the alternative A all around town, you try to pick the areas that are more likely and what's the disadvantage or advantage to doing that.
Right.
And transportation is probably one of them, walkability, affordability, things like that.
Yeah.
And also, impacts on the neighborhood. If you, I know we heard the term gerrymandering of districts to avoid certain neighborhoods, but some of that was on purpose. For instance, the historic districts, we tried to keep those out of the current concept. But you may also have houses with big lots that now you can build a, 6-story townhouse building next to.
Yeah, I think in the short term, we can kind of set the minimum expectations of compliance, kind of like we did 2 weeks ago for the commercial districts, of what those floors would look like and the pros and cons of those areas to the board, and hopefully the public is there as well. I think what we were thinking is at least in a week or two, we could get you a memo with clear direction of zoning considerations we'll be looking at. And then in the coming months at your regularly scheduled meetings, we can continue to discuss kind of what each area would be in terms of expecting of density and allowances before we get into setbacks and parking and things like that.
I think that's fair.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, that makes sense.
So with that, open it up for some questions. I think from logistics, can we start with someone online? And then, we're going to switch back and forth to give people the time to walk up while we're answering.
I'm just going to read some questions I've gotten in the chat. I don't know if you've gotten the same ones. It was asked, you indicated that a survey was performed in 2023. What was the percentage of Reading house homes responded? We had just under 800 responses, 99.5% were Reading residents. I think the others just declined to answer the question.
It was a self-selected.
It was, yeah. Mr. John Sullivan asked, have staff compiled how many units currently exist in the proposed new zone? I've heard how many units would be allowed in the new zoning, but don't have a sense of what the increase would be if every lot was developed to the maximum allowable. I do have those numbers, and I don't have them off the top of my head. I can open the spreadsheet in the background. I want to say it was close to 1,600 units in the district across 1,000 parcels. But I have many more specifics, from breakdowns to single family, 2 families, 3 families, and more. So I can get that later tonight.
Oh, I muted David. You go ahead.
Mr. Sullivan continued, would it be possible to take the current proposal to town meeting this spring with the qualifier that if passed, it would not go into effect until after fall town meeting and could be replaced with another proposal at fall town meeting? I don't think so. I think that's going to get a little too wonky. We'd rather, again, build confidence with the one proposal that we hope to bring. Ms. Hillary said, as a town meeting member, I agree wholeheartedly that we should not bring something to April town meeting. let's first vet ideas A to C to fully explore them and get the picture. I think we've all come to agreement on that. Mr. Baumgartner asked, there is a town meeting election coming up on March 5th, which may result in unknown amount of turnover of meeting members. What kind of aggressive outreach will be made to educate these members before the April town meeting? Without that, the meeting will be chaotic and unlikely to have a good outcome, and is a strong reason not to railroad a proposal through April meeting. I think we agree. We've briefly mentioned that, and it sounds like we're not headed towards April at this time. And we'll conduct town meeting member outreach throughout the spring and summer, especially after those elections are done. Mr. Baumgartner did continue. Please discuss the interaction between the Walkersbrook Drive corridor project and the reluctance to use the industrial zone along Walkersbrook Drive. So some of you may have received a flyer in the mail that tomorrow evening we are holding a meeting on the Walkersbrook corridor roadway redesign. It's really not in relation to zoning and uses and future development. We had secured a grant opportunity to conceptually look at that roadway and what improvements are desired and what could be made, because that's the asset we own in that area. And as we continue to try to have foresight for the area, we want to try to improve what we control, which is the right of way and in the future, the zoning. When it comes to the reluctance of the industrial zone along Walkersbrook Drive and MBTA communities, again, I don't want to say that, you know, that option is off the table. It's not off the table for us. It's just, right, when we have the discussion, we want to just make sure that the community is well aware of the other goals of town, right? That Market Basket Plaza is probably a one-shot redevelopment potential given its scale and size. And because of the limitations of the law, do we want to write zoning that is, right, dictated by the state in this law? Or do we want to write zoning that's dictated by our own vision and our own need in town, like increased affordability, maybe stronger commercial, maybe stronger LID, stormwater or energy efficiency? There's a whole range of options, age-restricted housing that you can do outside of MBTA compliance zoning language. So I just kind of want to keep that in the foresight of that specific area, because there is a lot of potential there. And just as long as we feel that the vision could be appropriate in MBTA communities, and if so, we're happy to do so. We just think that there's some stronger allowances we can do outside of MBTA communities as staff. So,
Andrew, would you describe for everybody what you mean by allowances?
So allowances in zoning, I mean, right, there are certain uses you could prescribe as by right, like age-restricted housing. You could, right, have mixed use alone as an option instead of multifamily and mixed use. So if you were tied to commercial uses there and want to make sure there's commercial development, you might not wish to have multifamily alone. Again, you can always try to incentivize mixed use, but if multifamily is allowed, it could be built, right? And so that's the fear there. Fear might be a strong word, but allowances, right, in terms of age-restricted housing, mixed-use development, certain commercial uses that you want to promote in the district, and everything in between or outside of those options, as well as affordability requirements, where we feel strongly that that specific area can certainly handle a 25% affordability requirement because of the scale of it and the acreage there and the type of development you would expect down there. And that 25% requirement is such a huge threshold for the town, because then not only do those affordable units get on, the whole projects get on. It's this whole nuanced thing of the subsidized housing inventory, but that, right, should be a hopeful minimum floor for affordability in the area is 20 to 25%. I hope that addressed your question.
So, yeah, so I'm going to open it up to the people in the room. And the first hand I saw was, yeah.
And
Quick question.
All right.
Quick question.
My name's Tom White. I'm in 46 Grand Street. I came to the first meeting in December.
Excuse me, it's hard to hear you.
Oh, it is? Okay. Tom White, 46 Grand Street. I was at the December meeting because I had just gotten the letter because our street was in that zone. The committee's talked about the survey that went out last summer, and I just want to make sure I understand what's on the committee and Andrew, you and your staff's mind. Because I've heard maybe Mark, you mentioned about people don't want tall buildings and things like that. My recollection of filling out the survey, the reason why I think this is important is because I want to understand that the survey apparently really informed you guys. When I took the survey, I didn't think I was responding to questions that related to zoning. Can you just answer me? Was that survey talking about zoning at that point, or was more like, what do you want to see in Reading? If you could answer that one.
Yeah, I think we tried to be as clear as possible in the messaging on the flyers and in the survey itself, that was true. We were very clear that Reading did not have compliant zoning and that those responses would inform future zoning efforts, right? Again, it was based on quality and form and not so much specifics of zoning language, right. But it was always set and described as an informative process to the future.
Yeah, my only point, when I finished it, I believe I finished it, I thought we were just talking about literally the downtown area, where the commerce and the business and open spaces. Thank you, I appreciate that. Last question, really quick. On this option A, all around town, I think Mr. Armstrong mentioned he doesn't want to see a circle all around town. I don't think that's what you're talking about. You're talking about some of these other areas near, like you talked about REI and Calarusos. That's what you're talking about. Right. You're talking about, because you still have to have an area near the train station, right? You have so much. And then, so it wouldn't literally be the entire town in a circle, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
we would be looking at like pockets similar to this.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, it'd be like taking pieces of the zone that's downtown right now, and taking pieces and putting them in different parts of town.
Thanks. Good question. Thank you. Good question.
I'm gonna unmute this guy.
Hi, Boriana Milanova, 94 Eaton Street. So I have first a very concrete question. Maybe it's for Andrew, maybe it's for the commission. What does it take to do the feasibility study? Do you guys need to propose it, to ask for money from town meeting? Can you kind of get it going? I've looked at lots of towns. Everybody's going at 15%, at least the one. I think it can be huge for the town and it's worthwhile.
Yeah, it just takes funds to run it with a third-party consultant, which, right, we have an existing grant. We can try to rescope that and see if an economic analysis can be within that. And if not, we would have to ask town meeting for additional funds based on the price, go to RFP or certain elements. But I think as we continue, especially in these commercial areas, vetting them, it's well worth our while to try to get to that 15% in those areas if it's proved feasible. So
okay, so then I have some comments on your areas. So about the current one and A, I think, I mean, I understand why you're going for it, but as far as affordable housing goes, very weak. They would just create units, won't be over 10%, just because of the size of the lots. So I think on its own, it's not enough. And I understand you want to do 25% somewhere else, and that's great, but may happen, may not. So I think it's wise to spread your risks. So not go only with one and rely on some future development, which may become realized or not. So it would be good for you to really don't put all your eggs in one basket. So when I'm looking at those, I mean, I know I wrote you a letter about approach C, and I think it works. But I personally think you should be going now for a compromise, some consensus proposal where there are many different elements to it. And nobody will be perfectly happy. But you take the A40s, the A80s, I don't know, you take also some big buildings, because I think that's how you get affordable. And you combine those things, and maybe not everybody's perfectly happy, but you meet different, you act based on the feedback you got from the community. At the moment, I think your proposal, the current one, is kind of very focused on a single aspect, these medium-sized buildings, and affords things like affordable housing, developing some areas which have been underperforming. It's good to bring more. And last but not least, I really think spend some time looking at what other towns are doing. It's very instructive. They have different goals from you. Many towns go and say, we want to minimize the impact on single-family housing. They say it upfront. And they go and combine, overlay big developments, they connect them, they're not single units. So for example, you take Reading Woods, connect it to Main Street, connect it across Gazebo Circle. There are many, many options. I think experienced town planners come up with many ideas. We can learn, we can bring something that's useful to our town, works. So don't ignore it. We are very lucky that so many communities are solving the same problem. They're different, but I think they're commonalities.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
You said we need to come up with a consensus approach, which to me sounds like you don't think any of the 4 options on the screen right now would be acceptable.
I do think, personally, I mean, I like B and C, personally. I'm really scared of this. The current one and A, I think it's not a responsible approach as far as affordable housing goes. That's my personal opinion. I think you need something else. You cannot just say, I'll do 25% in the future somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to talk in deep detail at a later time on affordable housing and the benefits and also the limitations of it. So, I mean, that's a very deep discussion, but I understand the 10% idea and threshold and trying to maintain that. So I'm very well cognizant of that.
So if you go back to your slides where you were doing the survey and look at the, you know, the,
Right,
the
and I know where
colorful,
affordable units placed on it. Yep.
it plays first, right? I mean, 30,
It is up there, yep.
yeah, it's the single highest, like, of all the questions you ask for multifamily housing, the colorful bar.
Sorry, my keys don't work.
It's okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's turn the line for someone else. I would like to speak, but there's also someone who's been holding their.
Yeah, there's problem. All right. We're actually going to go to you, David, on Zoom.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I want to echo what's been said. So David Corey, Mount Vernon Street. I've been to 3 or 4 of these meetings, and you know, I want to start by echoing what's been said at pretty much all the meetings, which is thank you to the planning staff for all the work that you've done on this. It's clearly that it's, you know, it's very detailed. I get that it takes a lot of work to run these models because there are so many different variables that are put in. I think my question comes based on a meeting that you guys held a few weeks ago that was largely with people in zones 4 and 5, District 4 and 5, which are the districts that are largely in the current proposal. And there was a map that was given out at that meeting that showed a larger district than some of the maps that were, part of this meeting. In particular, south of the train line, the map that I recall from that meeting went pretty much over to Summer. And further south, and I think even with that larger district, proposed district for mixed residential, the sentiment among the people at that meeting was, can we spread it out even further? And so it's concerning to me to come to this meeting now a few weeks later and see an even smaller proposed district. When I'm on Mount Vernon Street, I'm in the district pretty much regardless of how it's drawn. So I don't have the luxury of being able to say not in my backyard because my backyard is in the district, like regardless. And quite honestly, I support a lot of the efforts that this the MBTA communities legislation is in support of. Part of the reason that we bought our house was to be able to walk to the train. And so, being able to encourage that for more people, I think is a good thing. And so I guess my question is, what happened to that larger district map that I saw a few weeks ago? And what is it that caused it to shrink to what was shown tonight?
Yeah, so that larger map was drafted around November. For us as staff, there are qualities that when you disperse it over a wider area, there are benefits to that. And so that's why we started with a wider area that did branch out even outside of the half mile, but did keep it congruent and within that half mile. But there's benefits to dispersal of the zoning efforts. I think through the process, as we've heard, really the driving factor to reducing the map was the perceived unit capacity, or how that unit capacity of the district was calculated, which really comes down to the total acreage of a zone in simplified terms. So the unit capacity was a bit high, especially in relation to minimum allowances. So we worked to scale that back based on additional public feedback. But the point is well taken that, there's been a wide variety of options and views of housing in Reading. And as we showed on the maps, many branched outside the half mile and much larger than even we were considering. And many have condensed it and asked for smaller. So the current iteration of the map has tried to find that middle ground of, what's the floor, desirable floor for the area, and what's, the maximum allowances that the community feels is appropriate. So.
Yana Pilavsky, 3 Harriman Avenue. So I've been watching this for about 9 months now or so, and it's been really informative process. So I appreciate the staff putting this together. It has been, I don't want to say delight, but kind of interesting to watch the zone develop over the course of the last half a year or so. Last time we've met, we sort of ended on a little bit of a fuzzy note, and I believe you've covered most of it tonight, but I just want to run down through just a couple of points. They are zoning commercial district with just for MBTA, zoning it with this weird 25 sketchy % thing, and then overlaying it with MBTA. So, and I will state that I do like option B. I do like that the proposals that have been put forth, I genuinely do like, are focused on developing something that the staff has been working on for 4 years now. 5? It's going to be 5 years now. 7? So I think this is a really great opportunity for us to kind of take this initiative and push it across the finish line. But just so we're safe here, because I think the first outcome could be horrific. If we zone Market Basket and the next grocery store over, if we zone it with just MBTAs, we have the potential for a developer to come in and turn the entire thing into residential apartments, and we have no grocery stores in Reading. So we would effectively be creating a food desert. Now, am I getting that right?
Yeah, so if you use the district for compliance, multifamily would be an allowed separate use, which then means multifamily could be built. Again, you can try to incentivize mixed use or commercial development.
Hold on, that's the third point.
Yeah.
I want to go in order because this is really convoluted, and I think we could take a little bit of more time, and thank you for taking another 6 months of time for us to really understand this, right? So, now let's move on to this weird 25% like recent update. Someone pointed it out to me, and I appreciate that. So is that applicable? My read of it was that it gives the developer an option to choose either residential or mixed use. So they still have an option.
Sorry, you're talking about required mixed use, and it's 25% relation. So the industrial zone or business A would not qualify for required mixed use under the law.
Okay, so that option's out.
Right.
Okay, now just the third and final part to this is if we zone the Market Basket area for MBTA and be in compliance and introduce an overlay for mixed use, we have an opportunity to then create effectively market basket and houses on top. And because it's a large building, we get our affordability, right? But in order to achieve that, we need to incentivize the developers because they have an option, correct? They have an option of going with MBTA or going with mixed use. So if we put forth a proposal of, let's say, I'm making up numbers, just making up numbers, 30 units per acre density for the MBTA, gets us closer to compliance, wonderful. But we need to incentivize the developers with maybe say, mixed use 40 units per acre, right? Again, driving further the affordability and making sure that we get to keep our grocery stores. Right. All right, so I just wanted to kind of step through this process really quickly.
So that would be the concept in theory. You have your floor of multifamily and you find ways to incentivize the commercial through density or stories or other elements.
Okay, and, just two more questions. Thank you all for being so patient with me here. So question number one is, do you believe you have time to maybe pump out another survey for the town now that you've gotten a lot more engagement? Do you have it in you?
I mean, right, it's just, right, we would have to consider what is the survey informing and what is the feedback. And right, whenever we draft a survey, there's so many surveys in town, we just want to be cognizant that it's actually informing and directing. And so I haven't thought through of what a survey could look like in this sense just yet.
Okay.
But if we had to pump one out and wanted to, we probably could.
Okay.
It would just be a short response time.
And the last question, I just wanted to follow up. This was asked by, I believe it was John Sullivan, and you've answered it, but I wanted to get a little bit of a clarification there. When we rezone for 1,000 or 1,500 units, right? We're rezoning over existing homes. So we're not necessarily adding 1,500 units. We're adding whatever we currently have, or rather 15 minus whatever we currently have, how many plots we already have. And I think that's what the question was. You don't have the number, you have numbers in the Excel sheet, don't pull it out, don't pull it out. But in the future, maybe you could bring that to the floor, because I think when people hear 1,500, they get a little bit spooked. It's not 1,500, it's going to be less. So.
Yes, yep, I hear you.
That wasn't really a question, I apologize.
I hear you on that point. No, you're good. Nope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. We'll ask Gina to unmute. Gina on Zoom, I just asked you to unmute.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, I was hoping to just go back to what I think it was Heather said. I think she made an excellent point about the 40R and smart growth downtown, that restrictions were put in place based on the state rules at the time. And now that the state, changed the rules again, it might be a good time to bring the concept to town meeting to use these areas to help.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be part of what we look
Explore,
at as part of the all commercial.
Yeah.
All commercial concept.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of what
We should just
yeah.
be clear, because the underlying zoning there is the business district.
Right.
So all commercial would be that too.
Right.
Which makes me think, as people are commenting, if you feel like commenting on trade-offs that you'd be willing to make, like, okay, let's take our commercial and allow all residential, that would be interesting to know if just as Gina is saying, if under kind of the pressure of the MBTA communities requirements, if that shifts your perception from things that you may have said 2 years ago about what was important in the trade-offs.
Gina, did you have another question or comment? No? Not?
I can just say that, we've lost a lot of the businesses that came in. I mean, Pamplemousse just left, so I'm not really sure if maybe that zoning isn't working anyway. I don't know. I thought.
Thank you.
Katrina Madden, Prescott Street.
You might need to project. Yeah. Those mics
Do
don't
these
work.
They don't work?
You just
Okay.
gotta yell.
So I don't know much about all the commercial stuff. I feel like I've kind of gotten a handle on the, more the residential stuff. And I think my understanding is that with all the controls, that you've got the existing controls and the proposed controls for like setbacks and lot coverage. It seems like you were saying at one point that even if a builder came in with the proposed controls, they might not be able to actually build something with that many units on a certain size lot.
So, right, for us, that's really in relation to the smaller lots, right, where the 5,000 square foot lot under the density says 3 units can be allowed, but because all the other controls, it's really hamstrung to actually try to do that based on the lot coverage and parking needs. And could it in theory be done? Potentially. But those smaller lots are just naturally more restrictive in terms of their allowances for the units.
So, but we're still in compliance, even though that's the reality.
The zoning allows.
So can we change, can we keep the existing setbacks, the existing controls, and still allow for that many units, knowing that it might not happen? Would we be in compliance? I realize there's like the spirit of this and there's compliance. And I'm just wondering, like, from a compliance perspective, could we get away with that?
Potentially. I think we've tried to model it on different concepts and areas and it wasn't flushing out, but if you keep...
Because I feel like most of the people, or a lot of people in town, their problem with this is they don't want to see their neighborhoods change. And those, being able to build a huge building, with 10-foot setbacks and, it just makes the buildings that much bigger. It makes the lots feel like they're more desirable for being leveled and having a big building put up with 6 units in it. And if we make the controls so that that can't actually happen, I feel like it makes it more likely that maybe people will just put an addition on and put 1 more unit instead of 5 more units. It just makes it a little more reasonable.
I think where we ended up, right, is that the controls are pretty close to what is allowed now for a single family home. The big difference is the front, right? That was changed. The front yard setback changed from 20 to 10, right? So that I think everyone can get a sense of that. Well, you can't, right? We had this discussion last time because no one really knows where their exact lot line is. But you have a sense of what that would mean, right? 20 and 10 in the front. I think just by walking down the street. The big difference is the allowance of a 25% lot coverage, and correct me if I'm wrong here, to a 30% lot coverage. So right now, right, that's we're allowing 5% more on a lot than it is currently allowed. So people can build pretty enormous houses on their existing lots, right? And part of that is us as a community, or I'm going to say us as a country, right? We like property owners to have a lot of control over what they do on their own property, right? And so we generally haven't restricted to as really tight controls on what people can do, although anyone that goes in front of zoning would think otherwise. But right, we really haven't changed dramatically what those setbacks are. I think the question is, now that we would allow a 3-family, a 3-unit, would people on a particular property, would people build out to what they're allowed to with their single family, because they obviously aren't right now, but you could.
It just seems like as soon as you change those controls and make it bigger, they will. Like, that's what's going to happen, is it is going to take up every little inch that they can possibly take. So if we keep all of the controls as they are, well, that's as they are, and if they can't get a 6-unit, then that's fine.
Doesn't this also get to the need to achieve 15 units per acre across the area, and stop me if I'm mistaken about this. So saying, can we get away with controls if the more properties you can't build a 3-family, the more
Bigger the area.
But if it's
the bigger the
compliant.
area we need.
No, but if it's compliant, because you're saying that we're already proposing something that is compliant, but it's not, might not actually be possible. Because, and I understand that this doesn't go with like spirit of the whole thing, but I do feel like in town, we are trying to do all these other things that are increasing density.
I think, right, and I'm going to put words in your mouth because this is what I heard you say, right? On any particular unit, on any particular parcel, especially the ones that are around 5,000, 6,000 square foot, you might not be able to fit, 3 units plus the parking plus the landscaping. But in order for our district to be compliant, a large percentage of properties need to be able to actually fit all of those things on a parcel.
And that's part of the
And
modeling that takes a month to do, because they're looking at it not just as, this shape on a map, but what does it mean for each parcel, right? And does that get us into compliance?
So the model looks to establish a 1,000 square foot minimum on every lot based on the setbacks, the parking, which is a certain square foot based on the rates. And so if we keep increasing controls, lots fall out of that minimum 1,000 square foot in their tool base, and then don't count for compliance, which can knock us out of the density and unit capacity needs. So that's where it gets a little technical, both in the built environment and in the modeling. So the controls were factored in to get us to the needed density just over the minimum density of the zone.
But I'm sorry, I think also, right, alternate B, right, that's being proposed, right, lot of work that still needs to be done there, right? The idea, at least I understand it, is if we include one section, one area of town, right, like say along South Main Street, where increased density is allowed, where it may not be appropriate in a tight little residential neighborhood, but we could use that to offset some of the zoning parameters that we're talking about if we just do the town center concept, so that we could decrease, maybe cap the number of units that would be allowed. Or so, it gives us a little bit of
we might be able to
wiggle room to
fluctuate
play with, to sort of change that town center concept some to make it, fit in with what
exactly.
And I think one of the other points that was brought up, I think, at the last meeting, most of the lots within this area don't comply to all the current controls now. So we may have a 20-foot front yard setback, but I think it was 70% of the buildings within that zone don't meet that requirement. So changing the controls doesn't really change the neighborhood that much, because the neighborhood already isn't in compliance. So it
But
just basically brings
anything new that gets built.
anything new. If you have a line on the street, everybody's 10 or 15 foot setback, and you have now a house comes in with a 20-foot setback. Now you've got a house that's beyond everybody's setbacks. Or if you have 10 foot, now it might be a little bit closer, but it's not like 20 feet closer than all the other houses. So in the older neighborhoods, a lot of the lots don't conform. And by changing these zoning controls, they now do conform. So it's not going to change the neighborhood that much.
And then everyone doesn't need to go to the ZBA to do if they want to build a porch. Right. That's the other piece that I know probably all of you have, if you've done anything to your house, you end up going to the ZBA because in one way, shape, like no one's home conforms in some way on their lot, or the lot size doesn't conform.
But,
There's something that
Very few conform.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what's there, it's what gets built. right?
Right, but even under the proposed controls would still be substantially similar to what's built there now, right? Because they don't have 15 feet, 20 feet on all sides, front and rear. So it exists, I guess, is what we're saying.
Okay.
I think I'll just also add, right, which is that in each of our districts, there's a minimum lot size, right? And all those requirements are set off that imaginary lot size, right? So those requirements you're referring to, imagine that you have a 15,000 square foot lot. And we know that 85% of the lots in the district that we've chosen are smaller than that, right? And if you have a lot that's 5,000 square feet, you fundamentally just can't fit all the required pieces that you can on a 15,000. And that was the very beginning of this discussion about lowering some of them, was that they just functionally do not fit, and therefore the compliance model doesn't count them, right? So it's not because we really think lower setbacks are better, it was just that something has to give, right? There's trade-offs, and as you get the lots smaller, which reflect the actual existing lot sizes in that district, like what exists today, the parameters that you set, imagining they're 15,000 square feet, again, they don't fit. So what we heard from people was parking is most important. Great, we can set the parking back up, but as you adjust that up, that takes up more space, which doesn't leave you the room to then also increase your setbacks. So if there's only one or two things that you can leave the same on a 5,000 square foot lot, you can tell us what the top priority is. Does that make sense?
It does. Sort of.
I know.
I guess just the other thing is that I do feel like you said it right at the end of your presentation, where you're trying to figure out if it's if compliance or like the spirit of this, like I think you got to just focus on what we need to do to just be compliant, and because there are so many other ways in town that we're going to increase density that are outside of this zoning, like you said, maybe it doesn't make sense to use the industrial district for this. And, I'm trusting your professional opinion on that. But we're going to get housing there. So let's minimize what is affected by this proposal as much as possible, because it's going to happen in other parts of town through other means. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to take Narcissa from. Have ever come? Well, I've done them. I'll do from 7.
All right, here comes the history class.
Everett Blodgett, 99 Prescott Street. In the zone, out of the zone, in the district, out of the district. I would like to point out that Wednesday's paper, that's Wednesday the 31st, had the first map on it.
Gotcha.
Okay, and so it's really setting us where we going, where we've been, where we're going. Nobody even knows. It doesn't even, I know we got other names for this publication, but this is not right. Okay? I'd like to come down through, but I don't know how good I am at public speaking. I was great with controlling the classroom, but not in public speaking. This is a huge issue. I know that because a lot of the houses now are not in compliance, we moved it there intentionally so there'd be more light, more air, wider distances to the street. That was a big move, and I've said it before, that's in the master plan and it's in the Cpdc plan, that there was an increase back in about the early 80s to give us more space. I disagree with Mr. Weston, because my house sits on a smaller lot. It's not small. I'm guessing it's called 15,000. It'll could cut it into 5 units. It's huge. It's a huge move. And you start moving most of the houses on Prescott Street, and I can look up and down. Some of them are a little closer, some are a little back. Mine sets 28 feet from the sidewalk. And that rule of law says from the street. And I think it's going to be very impacting.
Okay, wait, can I interrupt you? What's from the street?
the setback requirement.
No.
That's not correct.
It's actually the town line.
Right.
It's the property line.
It's the property line,
Right.
which often is not the street.
Right, usually if there's a sidewalk, it's right at the edge of the sidewalk. Mine falls right at the edge of the sidewalk, so I'm 28 feet from the sidewalk. You start moving in, you're losing roughly 15 feet. You move a lot of those houses in 50 feet, it's going to be very, very tunneling. Other towns have moved the speed limits down to 25 and 30. Reading hasn't even made a move on that yet. That's kind of a sideline, okay? I'm also, the district got reduced down, and now the district basically takes a certain section of the population and puts all the burden on them. Not going to bother me if they move it in. I think it does bother me. I think state laws, especially in town laws, ought to be affecting all of us. We pay on basically equal tax rates for everybody, and all of a sudden this is not equal. This is all on the burden of that downtown area. And I think it needs to be somehow controlled better, because look at some of the things that they've allowed to be built that are just horrendous on very small lots. And I look at the corner of Summer Ave and
West Street?
No, the one that they made into a house with a plus house on the corner. I think it looks horrendous. So I think the idea of a book, a pattern book and that to get people toned in. Andrew's a good friend in many, many ways. He has worked so hard and I'm going to forget the other name right now. Mary has worked very hard, because I want to call her D. Benedetto, but it's just I think this is a horrendous amount of work, and I disagree with the state for doing it. And if you listen to the lieutenant governor yesterday, who said, well, we've moved all the units out along and increased the density around the train stations. And that's a beautiful thing, a wonderful thing, she said. It's a horrible thing. It's the spreading of us. I would like to look back to the population of the Native American that was 90 per square mile. 90 people, not units.
Thank you, Evan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to go to the Zoom.
We're going to go to Zoom and then, sorry. Maybe.
Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Thank you for all the work you're doing. I appreciate it. I am curious to know what sort of work has gone into our infrastructure, because right now the infrastructure we have doesn't even support the Reading that we live in. You can tell just by driving into town from any single direction. So we can't do it. So I don't know how it's going to work if this goes through. The other thing to me, and actually obviously more important, is everybody keeps referring to complying. I do not find anywhere where this is actually a law. I have been reading and reading for days and weeks. I see where we'll be denied grants, but I don't see anywhere where there's a law reference. So a signed bill saying that Reading or even any town must do this or else, yes, there's a threat. The AG put out some sort of advisory last spring, which is just that, an advisory saying that we could have some sort of litigation, but so what? Why don't we stay Reading, not listen to what other towns are and how they define themselves, and be Reading and not comply? We don't have to comply.
Can you just say your name and address so everyone knows who this is?
Sure. Narcissa Lyons, Bancroft Avenue.
Thank you, Narcissa.
Do either of you have the Mass General Law number so that Ms. Lyons can?
So it's Chapter 40, Section 3A. All MBTA communities will have the zoning districts at the specified requirements. And so it is written into Section 3A.
Yes, I've read it. I don't actually see that it's actually required.
So that is the law. So Mass General Law, Chapter 40, that is the law. Section 3A is a section of the law. And there's just no other way to say it. That is the law.
Yeah. Right, and I've said it in each of these meetings, right? This board is going to recommend something to town meeting. If town meeting decides not to approve something, that's town meeting's prerogative. But our charge and our goal is to bring something to town meeting for town meeting to vote on. So that discussion of whether the town wants to not comply with the law is for that forum.
But have you read it? Because it actually isn't a law. There is no signed bill. It does not exist.
Yes,
All right.
yes, there is. And maybe we
yeah.
could follow up
Yeah.
with the link to the actual
Yeah,
law.
we
But
can do
yes,
that.
there is a law.
Yep.
Yeah, up to you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your preparation. I'm Ida Matera Fitzgerald. My family has grown up here for about almost 100 years. I've seen a lot happen. My sister and I decided, my parents passed away, that we would not sell the property at 1481 Main Street, which is now Matera Conservation, to a developer because we didn't want to see what was going on with some of the big buildings in town. We didn't want to see that. We wanted something for the town. And we took a loss money-wise, but we thought it was worth it to give something back. That being said, first of all, I think it's very important. The trade-off of this, I feel, is going to critically impact our schools, our parking, our sewer, our child and public safety, police and fire department, snow removal. Yes, as this lady said, we need something else, we need something else. It's not right that our desire for a no vote is being taken away. And so I say, fight for no.
Thanks, Sean. And thank you to Andrew and Mary.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries.
You'd think I'd be used to this, Chris Haley, 71 Tennyson Road. I don't think it's been said enough. Maybe it is the elephant in the room, but you are making the right decision by putting this off until November. I can't say that enough. I know that you got the rainbows and butterflies in the beginning. Everything was great. You got the praise, you got the flack, it all comes. But when people look back, it's going to be February 5th of 2024 is when it shows really that when people think things are fixed, that we're kind of, why bother? They already have their minds up. We're already doing this. Why bother? This is why bother, because a change was made, and it takes a certain kind of person or personality or both of you to not acknowledge that you were incorrect, because that's not the case. You've done immense work. Like I told you, I've seen you all over the place. No one will ever know how much stuff that you've done. But it still takes a lot to just be like, listen, we're going to reshift gears because you're listening to the feedback. And that's really all that we can ask for. It might not be the right in the end. It might be where we were supposed to be, but you listened. It can't be said enough. The same thing with Cpdc, because you're also seeing kind of the pathway. So wherever we end up, I think that that's where we were going to be in the end. But just remember that you guys listened, and I appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. I do, right? I mean, we have a lot of meetings and listen to a lot of feedback on all sorts of different developments and all sorts of different things. And we really, right, we want to do what's right for the town, what's right for the neighbors. And really, I mean, when people come and spend their evening, right, coming and talking to us, right, we listen. And when I say I want feedback, as I did the past couple of meetings, like that's honest, right, not just talk, but you know, it's important. It's important to right, we all have a stake in this and how we shape this community. So thank you for acknowledging that.
Yeah, and can I just add that that is oftentimes the way the committee works. When Andrew and I stood before the select board last spring and invited everybody to get engaged in all the meetings, we meant it. We meant it all summer. It's wonderful that more people are engaged now and providing the kind of feedback that we can use.
John? Next.
Yeah, so we'll go to John Martin. Sure.
Hi, I'm Mary Ann Downing, 13 Heather Drive, which is currently not in any of your plans, but who knows. First, a process, kind of just general question, is the public hearing going to continue or are you going to close it? Because this is the public hearing on this.
I would think that we'd keep it open.
It's a good question. I think we would keep it open to the 12th so we can write that memo and kind of guidance, get the input and feedback on it, and then hopefully close from there. But TBD.
Yeah, so I mean, I was taking a lot of notes during the meeting, and I think a lot of people addressed my concerns. I think I want to reiterate that I agree with Boreana that looking at other communities, and no two communities are exactly the same with the number of stations they have, with how much commercial they have, but it seemed to be the thing that struck me with other communities is they started with some guiding principles, and such as avoid residential. I saw in Needham there was a dueling minimal compliance versus maximal compliance, and they had to come up with a compromise. So I wonder when you move forward, as you consider these models, I don't know whether you'll get any guidance from the Cpdc, or maybe there might be a consideration of a subcommittee of the Cpdc to work with you, or what a lot of communities do is a residential advisory committee, not to start over, but maybe to, as you're looking at the models for evaluation criteria. I don't know if the community agrees on any kinds of things, because it was a consistent kind of almost no-brainer in, some of the, you name some of the towns, and I know I've talked to you, Andrew, that it was, okay, gee, we got commercial within a half mile of the train, let's hit that first. Let's avoid residential. And there's reasons for that, even though we're all different. We all spent a ton of money on our homes. We chose the suburbs to have more space, to make noise, to have our kids run around. And there's some people who want that, and there's some people who want, the less maintenance and the condos and apartments. So there's room for everything, but we have to acknowledge that people bought into these S15 zones for that reason. And that just led me to something else, which maybe will be an unpopular view when we want to talk about preserving commercial. But in looking at a lot of the tax discussions and assessments, we will get more growth and more tax money if we build more residential, because it's assessed higher, especially if it's condos. When I look at what comes in, like what was at Reading Woods and what is there now, it's a lot more tax revenue because it's housing. So if nobody's going into the commercial and it's just sitting there, and we want new growth to pay for things, preferably not with too many new school kids, but that depends on the size of things. And just my last quick point, because I know it's getting late, something Heather said struck me, because I was looking at the same thing when you mentioned home goods. It was something I think I was posting about online. Like, home goods is 4 acres. There's a rehab center right next to it, 3 acres. And so there you have a 5-acre parcel. So that led to my question, is the model that you guys are working with easier to use and play with when you look at commercial parcels, because you're not looking at all these individual lots, like when you have some nice big, 8-acre chunk? So
Yeah, it
that
gives
makes
you
it
just
easier.
a bit more flexibility.
So then, yeah, because then you can build in, oh, we can make this work. So I think that the message I would have, like the woman Gina, whoever it was that spoke, yeah, town meeting made decisions based on criteria at the time and might change their mind now. I would count myself in that group that, as things evolve, there may be a lot of people that may say, well, we want to keep our neighborhoods and, look at things different, look at where we can get compliance. And that is all. A lot of people, I'm just checking to see if there's any other thing about the model residence. No, that's good. And I just also want to say, and I was saying this to people around me, this was a great presentation. I just wish it happened 3 months ago, but it is what it is.
Thank you.
It would have saved, we would have been ready for town meeting. I think people would have worked through things. Didn't you do presentations like this at the community workshops in the fall?
Yep.
Yeah, so these workshops, that presentation had been.
No, but I mean, the one with all the trade-offs and all the answered questions. I know there were workshops and you came to
Yeah.
FinCom, but I mean, like, you answered a lot of questions and all of the comparisons, like,
I don't think we
everything.
would have gotten there without all the public input.
Yeah.
Because we wouldn't have known what was on people's minds to be able to answer the
Right,
question.
I know,
So
it's
it
like
is, right, it's
chicken
like
egg.
this.
I know,
Yeah,
it's
you
just.
can't get there until we have.
Answering, you've made a lot of progress since December, like Chris said, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm asking Jonathan Barnes to unmute.
One online and then you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. I'm Jonathan Barnes. I live on Pratt Street. And I'm a town meeting member representing Precinct 5, which is primarily affected by this. I had a whole host of thoughts and comments, and obviously at the late hour, I'll reserve on most of them. I wanted to first thank Andrew and the planning team, Mary and the planning team, and CPDC for providing this opportunity, and Andrew and Mary, all the other opportunities you provided. This has really been a work in progress, and you have put in a lot of effort and a lot of time, and it really shows. You guys have been great in presenting all of this to the town and to hearing the town, because obviously this has changed dramatically from what it was at that last meeting, which changed from all the other ones. So you guys are listening, and that's great, and I thank you. I wanted to ask a question first, just to understand, and then I'll have another comment, but I wanted to just make sure I understand the process. You're talking about these 4 different options right now, and I thought I heard, Andrew, you said, or somebody say that at some point in the process, the plan is to present the developed option or options. I wasn't sure whether you were suggesting that you're ultimately going to be presenting only one option, or are you planning to present several options, or at least more than one option, to either CPDC down the road, or are you planning on presenting one option or more than one options to a town meeting, whenever that is, either in the spring or the fall?
So I believe our goal would be, develop concepts for all 4 of these, and then start to identify, the strengths and weaknesses of both, and then start to whittle it down to the one preferred option to bring to town meeting. I think bringing 2+ proposals to town meeting is just tricky, and can just add confusion. So we'd like to, reinstill and build confidence on one proposal if we can help it.
Although, I'm going to jump in here, optimally, we'll get to one, but I don't think that we want to, there may be more than one that deals with more than one issue, and we may end up with 2. I think if we end up with more than 2, it's really going to be a crazy town meeting. But there may be a rationale to have 2 different ones.
Yeah,
and we'll only know that once we
start to identify. Exactly.
Okay. Crazy.
I agree.
More would be like,
yeah.
I don't even know.
I agree. I just wanted to understand what you were saying. I mean, I totally agree, and no matter what you present at the town meeting, I'm sure we all are expecting that you're going to get a lot of other alternatives and options presented. It is going to be quite the town meeting. But I'm grateful to hear that you heard what everybody said, and you're now presenting these different options that we can vet between now and then. So that's great. I just wanted to make a whole bunch of comments, but I just wanted to make one comment, I guess representing basically precinct 5. And I know I'm in the zone, although it appears from the map that you showed personally that you showed this evening, I may not be in the zone. It doesn't matter. This isn't about me personally. It's about this neighborhood. And I want to say at the outset, I think almost everything you heard, or clearly the majority of what you heard at the majority of your meetings, was the town of Reading, the citizens of the town of Reading support increasing the diversity of housing stock, the diversity of the population, the concept of increasing affordable housing so that the children of folks who live here, the aging parents and the aging citizens that live here will have places to go. Everybody, or most everybody, supports the concept inherent in this MBTA Communities Act. I would say that the tool that the legislation is using to address those goals is probably not what's favorable. And I think when you're hearing negative comments about it, it's largely because the tool is not the best tool to do it. And I think that's what you're hearing, at least with respect to its impact on the downtown area around the depot. I understand the concept. I understand the concept of public transportation. But I think what you heard is this area, Reading obviously is a historical town generally, but this area is the most historical, and I'm saying that with a capital H as well as with a small h. In addition to people wanting to have their neighborhoods retain the character that it has now, there are an enormous number of historical homes. And just to digress for 1 second, your comment that this doesn't change the existing historic protections. With all due respect, and I'm on the historical commission, the historic districts are not affected by this, and those are the areas where there are legitimate, strong protections to protect the houses from the historic homes from being demolished. Homes that are on the historic inventory, and there are numerous homes on the inventory that are in this area that's affected, they exist only under the demolition delay bylaw, which, as you pointed out, currently has the very inadequate protection of only withholding the permission to demolish the home for a period of 6 months. And I've been on the historical commission for going on 11 years, and I have yet to see where we have been successful in putting off more than 6 months the retention of a historic home that a developer or a homeowner wants to demolish. They merely come before us in August or September, wait for the 6 months, and then demolish the house. So it's really not great protection, and a lot of these homes are going to be in jeopardy. But my main point is, and I think an earlier speaker mentioned this, the people in this neighborhood, and Mr. Blodgett said it as well, the people in this neighborhood don't really want to see the character of their neighborhood change. And no matter what we say, and you heard it at the meeting in December or in early January, although this zoning bylaw change does not in itself create any changes, but it allows for the change, and it establishes what the town would look to see in this area. So, like it or not, the neighborhood will change because developers will come in and they will put in different structures that conform to these new guidelines. And I would have to say, although there was some talk about the fact that it doesn't change the zoning standards that much in this area, because most of the properties are certainly far less than 15,000 square feet. But many of them are greater than 5,000 square feet, and that's not even the point. By shrinking the setbacks, and you talk about not changing them that much, but changing from 20 feet to 10 feet, in my opinion, is significant. All of them are shrinking. When developers or new property owners come in and want to conform to that, they are going to not necessarily retain the existing structure because the existing structure doesn't meet those new dimensions that you're talking about, nor necessarily does the existing structure provide the most efficient way to capture 4 units or 5 units. They're going to demolish the homes and they're going to put in new structures. And they're going to look very, very different. The character of the neighborhood is going to be very, very different. And that has negative ramifications to the town. It's not necessarily the concept of affordability or changing the stock, but it clearly, you have to accept the fact that conceivably and over time, and it may not be my lifetime or other people's lifetime, but over time, the town of Reading in the area where this zone will exist will likely change. And that's why I think you heard, contrary to what one of the earlier speakers said, the people at that meeting weren't looking to expand the area. They were simply looking to not necessarily have it imposed or superimposed on this one area. They wanted it less imposed on this one area and a little bit more imposed on other areas. And I applaud you for shrinking the area down to what are the minimum acceptable requirements because of the negative ramifications of expanding it. I would also want to just add, I totally support and would ask you all to consider expanding the other options, whether it's B or whether it's C. And I wouldn't necessarily say commercial only, but it should be a mix of residential areas, perhaps in other areas other than just the small areas within the half mile of the railroad station. It should include the business B area. It should include the industrial, part of the industrial area, and it should include the commercial area, business A. Just spread the impact of this and the diversity of this in larger areas. I guess that's enough for right now. That's a lot to chew on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Hi, Rhonda Holt, 46 Fairview Ave. So I have a question about the industrial zone. So Market Basket owns, obviously, the store, the parking lot, K&G, all those buildings, they own that entire lot, correct?
It is. It is one parcel.
Market Basket own that parcel?
It is a different owner who owns the whole parcel, and Market Basket is his tenant.
Oh, all right, because I thought, when I looked it up on the property records, I thought it said like Market Basket LLC or something, but I could be wrong, but, so Market Basket.
Under one ownership.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, if that was your question.
The parcel is under.
The whole parcel's under.
Right.
So do you know if the owner is willing to sell the half that's dead there? I mean, Market Basket's kind of active, but the owner could subdivide that lot, correct?
He could.
Or she, whoever.
Yeah, they could. They could. But I don't know their willingness to do so. Every time we've sat with them in conversations, they're definitely keen on that parcel and what its potential is.
But they don't want to do anything with it. They just want to sit on it.
At this time, their focus is the roadway connectivity and trying to get any development towards the street front.
Oh, and they want to leave the back open? I mean,
It's
like back.
a whole bunch of what ifs right now. So in reality, he just wants to hold the parcel and see what could potentially be done in the future.
Okay.
Even if you did subdivide, we couldn't zone for just that one lot.
Right.
And be in compliance. We can't do that.
Right.
No, but I was just wondering if it was similar to Woburn, where there's, how there's the Market Basket there, and then you have the rest of, whatever, home goods, restaurants and everything. But I thought Market Basket owned that property. I could be wrong there too. But I just want to know what that was down on the industrial zone on. So the lots the town owns are the kind of the DPW down and behind Dunkin' Donuts.
I think there's
there's something behind Sunoco, right? That's small though.
Yep.
But then we own by the medical buildings.
We
Also now, or
we own the DPW off Walker's Brook.
Yeah.
And I think there's a small parcel somewhere.
I mean, that's actually a lot of it. That's quite a bit of acreage back there, though, where all the dumpsters and stuff are, right?
That open.
There's a lot of wetlands issues in that area too, though. There's a lot of setbacks, and I don't know if there's riverfront area there, but I know when I was at Conservation Commission and they were building Market Basket, there were a lot of issues with.
I feel like there's issues all around the whole town. I mean, we're just kind of sitting on the
So you
swamp.
look at, there's a lot of open space there, but a lot of it's not buildable.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so definitely a lot of wetland implication there in floodplain and other, but we own the DPW and a small parcel or two somewhere around there.
Okay. But there's still the possibility we can do stuff there without having to wait on. I mean, you could still zone market. Oh, I don't know. In case the guy decides to
We'll
sell it,
explore
right?
all
Okay.
options and yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank
That's
you.
it. Oh.
Other questions or comments in the room?
Rick Schaefer has raised his hand.
No, Zoom.
Chris DiMattei, I live in High Street. So I heard earlier you were asking for some guidance or input as to how to deal with this. So my thought is, one of my biggest problems with the current proposal, the MR Town Center one, is it disproportionately puts the burden of the MR zone in a small area, so that that part of town has to deal with most of the multifamily and the rest of it doesn't. So that's one of the reasons why I don't like that particular one. The all-around town A spreads that burden across the whole town, but what I don't like about it is I feel like it pits one resident against another, because some of them are going to say, why is the zone in my area and not in his area, or why is it in his and not hers? And that's just a recipe for disaster. I mean, I think you've heard a lot about just how divisive this whole issue really is, right? I've been to 3 of these meetings, and people have said, why not make it smaller? Why not make it bigger? Why not make it in Lexington so we don't have to deal with it? Just building consensus on this is going to be an incredibly challenging thing, right? So option A, I think, just is too divisive to really be reasonable. Just from where I sit and what I've heard, that's just my 2 cents worth. Option B, I think, tends to, the other 2 things that I don't like about A and the current one is most of the zone is comprised of these smaller lots that would only be able to be developed for, let's say, 5 units or less. Right. And that doesn't give you one bit of increased opportunity for affordable housing, right? So again, you're doing all this, you're bringing all these units in, and you don't get you get very little, if any, affordable units out of it. So again, I find that as a negative to both of those concepts. When you look at B, now you're saying, well, we're going to propose maybe a few big buildings, and that helps get you it gives you a little bit of an opportunity to include affordable housing, which is a plus. But again, I still think that if that option B has some areas of the S15 or S20 in there, you're going to have people arguing over why me and not him, and that's just... It's just a recipe for a big disaster and a big fight in town meeting. So what does that leave us with? It leaves us with option C, which I get is not ideal, but I think you have to run through that iteration, at least for the very least, to be able to say to the community, we looked for an opportunity to not have any of the impact in any of the neighborhoods. None of the S15 people were touched. We did everything in commercial or industrial zones, and we were able to make it comply, and here's what that looked like. Because you're going to get that question, whether it comes from residents or the town meeting members, somebody's going to say, why haven't you done a version where none of the neighborhoods are impacted? So I kind of feel like in my mind, prioritizing these 4 options, I would try to do C just to see if it's even feasible. It may not be. And if it isn't, then you can just say to everybody, we tried, we couldn't make it conform or comply. Just get it out of your heads. It's not going to work. And then we can move on to the other things, because you've answered the question that everybody who is fighting this from a neighborhood perspective is asking. So I would say start with C, then work backwards, go to B, go to A, and do it that way to see if even C is feasible. If it's not, great. If it is, even better, because now we can go to everybody and we can say, what do you think of this? We found a way to be in compliance without touching any of the neighborhoods. Is this what you want, or is it not what you want? And I think you'll be surprised by the answer. I really do. Because I think a lot of people don't think that that's possible. And it may not be, but if it is, it would be so worthwhile for everybody to be able to see that. And what would that look like? And again, part of the what would that look like is, if we build in the commercial and or industrial areas, are we talking about 3- and 4-story buildings, or are we talking about 8- or 9-story buildings to get that compliance? Because that's important. People could look at a 10-story building and say, no way. I mean, I don't want to mess with the neighborhoods, but I don't want a 15-story or 10-story building over here. And that's an easy thing for them to be able to wrap their head around and at least form an opinion and offer some useful guidance to you guys. So that's kind of what I wanted to just sort of help. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah,
coming.
No, that's already, yeah. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Right. I like that comment, right? I do feel like we need to run those things. I'm going to say down to ground to really understand, not only us, right? Everyone understand what do those mean. I do just want to correct one thing, is that even the commercial is in someone's backyard, right? So the difficulty we have in Reading, right, when we compare ourselves to a lot of other communities, is that decisions that past boards have made, right, have allowed, I mean, some of these split zone things, I mean, it's just crazy to me what is the decisions of past boards. I mean, it probably made sense at the time, but every single development we see, right, there is a residential abutter, and it's in someone's backyard. So we don't have that possibility of saying, oh, it can fit here and it won't affect the neighborhood. Because we're going to get that no matter what. There's definitely degrees of neighborhood impact. I completely get it, but I do want to just sort of like get out there, like we don't have properties in Reading that are just clearly.
I recognize that that's absolutely true. Even the southern corridor of Main Street, there are streets with single-family residential that are right there.
Or residential right on Main Street, right?
Yes, exactly.
But don't really.
The contrary to that is those people bought those houses knowing they were that close to the commercial zone, right? So I agree. I mean, I don't think there's any way that you're going to be able to make this comply and not have somebody adversely affected. The question is, can we do something that maybe has the least people adversely affected? And I think the C has the potential for that. I don't even know if it'll work, right? I'm not a planner. I tried doing the thing and I hit a brick wall. I mean, that was the other thing I was going to ask is there any way that the public can help you with some of this work? Right? Like, I know this is a huge amount of work. Running through these iterations takes a lot of time. And, is there any way to, many hands make light, less work? It may not be just something to throw out there. It may make things worse even. I don't know.
No, I appreciate the help and support in all of the words tonight. So
I have a quick comment and a suggestion. I see it is late and I see somebody has their hand up. One is I wanted to make a clarification because in addition to listening, I was looking, and when somebody just said all the commercial is next to residences also, I saw a couple people look at that like suspiciously, and it's true. If you look down South Main Street, the commercial, it's abutting residences. Commercial is different from industrial, so I just wanted to make that clarification.
There may be, right, if you start to pick, there's a couple of parcels in the industrial zone that don't have residential, but you really have to search.
Exactly.
You have to search hard to find a commercial property that doesn't have it.
And then I actually do have a suggestion, but I'll wait till, I don't want to talk over people. A suggestion for how people can help. I see on online chats, a lot of online chats in town, people pulling up information. If I saw this in the other town, I saw this in the other town. If anybody's doing research and you're seeing things, if you could put it into like a matrix, some sort of understandable format, because I know these things will eventually come up at town meetings. So if you're developing information, share it, and share it in an understandable, clear way.
Thank you. We can jump.
I'm gonna unmute Rick. Rick, I'm asking you to unmute.
Okay.
There you go.
First of all, thank you for all the work that's being done and still needs to be done. And a couple of things. I want to bring up something that was mentioned last meeting, which was on the setbacks to consider an average between the houses that are adjacent to any piece of property in the setback, so that we don't have a situation where even if the house is at setback 10 feet, that you need to move it back 20 feet, because that's equally bad to the opposite. In looking at many of the streets, the setbacks are 10 feet rather than 20 or 25 or 30, and they should be, that should be maintained. The other one is for the Springtown meeting, to get on the docket to keep, to change the demo of historical buildings from 6 months to 12 months, to get that in there as a separate line item, so to speak. That may be important, something to consider. I think that you need to submit multiple plans. I don't think one should be distilled. I don't think that there should be a favorite that's put out there. I think that there should be a minimum of 3 plans that are put out to town meeting. Let town meeting members fight over it. And I think that's something that needs to be hashed out at town meeting. And I think that if you put one out there, it's either yes or no. And that means that town meeting members are not going to like that. I've been there before. I like to be able to discuss things at town meeting, and I think there's enough people who are articulate and intelligent and care so that they can talk about it, and it's, so to speak, out of your hands. I really think that there should be some choices for town meeting members. I also appreciate Jonathan Barnes's words, and I have to say that I really agree with everything that he said. I'm on Woburn Street, and I really would hate to see the neighborhood change. I've seen changes over the last 30 years that are detrimental, and I think that the changes, no matter what, are going to cause a cascading effect on the neighborhood. And it may not take 2 years, it may take 5 years, it may take 20 years, but it will change, and will change the nature of Reading, and we don't want to do that. Another point is we already have big buildings, and we did a horrible job selecting them. The aesthetics of many of the buildings, the lot coverage of many of the buildings is unacceptable, and it just has changed downtown quite a bit. If there are 4, 5, 6-story buildings all in one area, and we're able to connect, and we're able to do something really nice with the neighborhood, to connect the downtown with an area that's just beyond the tracks, going over towards Market Basket, I think that's an enhancement, and I think that will help, in some ways, help it'll help the look of the buildings that are currently in place. Um, I just can't see not doing it because of the consensus in there. I don't believe there is a consensus that there should be no more tall buildings in Reading. And the last one is something that came up last week as well, and that is if there's some way to fashion utilization of the current envelopes of the houses when they are turned into multiple families or multiple families getting enlarged, whether it be to maintain the envelope or maintain the front of the house or 3 walls or something so that we can at least keep the look of the neighborhood. And I think if we're able to do that, that could alleviate some of the problems down the line with the inherent changes that would take place to the aesthetics. Other than that, I think that, again, I appreciate everything that's going on. I feel like there is changes that are being rammed down our throat. I think that I understand what the state wants to do, but I also think that it may be good ideas, but it's not comfortable in any way, shape, or form that this is what they want to do to the neighborhoods around the stations. We only have 5% or so of our population even uses the train, and I think that we're in an untenable situation no matter what. So I thank you for letting me speak, and again, appreciate everything that you're doing.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
Asking Elizabeth.
Hi, Elizabeth Gasmondo on Sunnyside Ave. I was in the zone, now I'm out of the zone, but just appreciate all the work that you're doing. One of the questions, and I may have missed a discussion because I have family at home, a few things I had to tune out for. So I wanted to just thank you for continuing to look at protections for the historic buildings and also the multiple family lots that a developer could purchase multiple lots. That was something that I brought up in the December meeting. So thank you for continuing to look at that. But about the parking, so I know that we talked about the parking, and in some of the meetings we talked about, concerns, especially for this initial plan being so focused on the downtown area in areas where parking is such an enormous issue, that I'm sure to make the compliance work, that the 1.5 works better than going to the two parking spaces. But I guess if that hasn't been discussed, I just wanted to bring that up again. I remember the woman in the December meeting that was talking about elderly services and how hard it is for her to get parking, for in front of homes. And even on Sunnyside, there have been times when the train has people going to park from other parts of the town has backed all the way up on Sunnyside, not quite at my house, but getting close. And I feel like the density that's potential for 5, 10, 15, 20 years out to not have those 2 parking spaces as a minimum requirement seems like it's just creating a bad problem. And certainly there's been a lot of construction around Reading, but sometimes it's very hard to drive through the downtown area to get to places that you want to go. Even getting over from where I live over to the high school can be challenging at sometimes. And I just feel like we're going to create this gridlock. We don't want a gridlock in the center of our town and not be able to move around our town for activities, for driving kids to activities around the town. And this is just, a random example, but like being in Boston a few weeks ago, everything was in gridlock in the whole town, in the whole downtown area, because everyone was running all the lights and you couldn't go anywhere. I'm like, gosh, I don't want our town to be like that, especially in this very dense area. So anyway, just wanted to talk a little bit about the parking.
Thank you. I'm sure run through iterations. We'll have those discussions.
Yeah.
Go to Heather on the Zoom. I asked you to unmute, Heather.
Hello. All right, sorry. Hi, everyone. So my name is Heather. I live on Ash Street, and I'm married to Rockable, who's I think on this also. And we've definitely been following this whole process for a while because I'm part of. I saw the survey that you put out maybe beginning of the year last year. And I just firstly want to thank you, as many people have. It's an insane amount of work that you're putting into this, and a lot of late nights that we witness, and a lot of late nights that we probably don't witness. So thank you for, trying to not only do your job, but also you're getting a lot of different opinions, a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different personalities coming at you. And I think you're all handling it very professionally. And, so I applaud you for that. Just a couple, I don't typically speak. I haven't spoken at any of these meetings. I have listened, but I don't typically get on and speak. But I just wanted to make a few comments. I definitely, and also this is coming from a perspective of somebody that has not lived here for 30 years. So I'm originally from Maine. I'm not even from Massachusetts. I have been in Massachusetts for about a decade, but this is, I'm not somebody that has lived in the same house for 30 years, like a lot of these individuals have. And I think that, I really think that's another thing to applaud, people advocating for their communities and their neighborhoods and their homes. And, they want to keep their communities, and they're advocating for something that's important to them. And I definitely respect that. And that's needed in a lot of areas of life, not just zoning and property discussions. So kudos to everyone that is putting out their opinion with some conviction and passion. I do think that, there are some parameters that you guys have already thought through. Sounds like it's already kind of on the docket of what you're planning on putting in this agenda, and with considerations to historical homes, setbacks, boundaries, landscaping. It seems like you've really taken, even before taking public opinion, you've thought through a lot of matters of importance. And also I've heard a lot of people mention that they want, the facade of whatever developments or properties that may be constructed to sort of fit into the environment. And I believe that you've addressed that, it might have prior or post, but regardless, I believe you have addressed the facades, and that is a priority to you and your committee as well. Just a couple other quick little things I just wanted to say. I don't mean to take too much time. Change is life, and every second of everything is changing. We're all, every single cell in all of our bodies are changing right now. So that's what life has changed. And if you look at writing 100 years ago, there's a lot less people, a lot less housing, and for us all to be here, there had to have been change. And the population is growing, and I'm, in my 30s, and I know a lot of people that are having a lot of trouble even finding a house, even finding a condo. There's not a lot of inventory. And the first step to getting any sort of inventory is easing up on zoning. And I'm sure anybody in the room right now would, if I said to them, like, can you believe this housing crisis? It's awful. Everybody would probably say, yeah, I know, it is awful. And, zoning is a lot of red tape and restrictions and regulations on your own property. And regardless of whether or not developments are developed, I think people should have more freedom with their properties that we're paying like 5 figures on for taxes. And whether or not this passes, like, Reading is going to change. Hopefully it's going to change in a good way. And I think these town meetings are giving us a voice and some control over the change. But, you know, life has changed, and that's all I wanted to say. So thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
Thanks, Heather. Appreciate that. Yeah, I applaud you speaking up, right? It doesn't matter whether you've been here for 30 years or, you know, or a year, right? You're still part of the Reading community, and having your voice being part of that is great, and encouraged you to continue to speak up. Thank you.
And I think it's also important that younger people speak up, because, you know, I know my kids would love to live in Reading, and, you know, can't afford to buy places. And when the houses do come on the market, they're not there for very long. And I think all of us have similar situations with younger family members that would like to move to this community, as well as, you know, older people that are getting to the point where we can't afford our houses that we raised our families in.
Did you have some comments, Tom?
Yes, I did. I'd like to summarize maybe some of the comments that I've heard here too, and trying to focus people in a particular way. To start, I think it is more likely than not that some portion of the area map that we have drawn will be included in the final proposal. In other words, what I'm saying is we may have an area outside that's in the commercial zone. Maybe that's 200 units, maybe it's 4 or something like that, or we may have 2 that are like that. But I'd like people to focus on what we've already proposed inside that area. There still seems to be a little bit of an issue as to whether that area that's inside the circle should be small or large. My sense, listening to prior comments here, is people would prefer it smaller. In other words, the capacity to build it out is closer to 1,500 than it is 5,000. And so I'd like to hear any comments on that. And I want to say you can write in your comments. With regard to parking, I heard what Elizabeth had to say, but the commission did start off at 1.25. And after listening to the public, we raised it back to what I understand is the single family lot size of 1.5. We also have within our control the ability to make streets, well, within our control, or the town control, the ability to make streets one way, the ability to make parking on one side, the ability to set up parking hours or times of day. So I think we've got things in our control that would help traffic. In addition, I would encourage you to take a look at the categories that we listed so that we would prevent multifamily housing from having excess parking, such as businesses being operated in those houses. So take a look at that. We've made some modifications there. With regard to historical, Andrew has thrown out as a suggestion to increase the 6-month moratorium to 12 months in the historic district. Take a look at that. If you think something might work that's a little bit better, let us know. With regard to setbacks, the commission has also made some changes with regard to lots of 15,000 and more, but I'd also encourage you to take a look at, I think it is under section 6.3 footnote 1, that basically says, well, first, I gather that the most critical thing that people are focusing on is the front yard setback, and I would agree with that. But what I would be looking at here is the one section I mentioned says that you average the 2 of your neighbors. So if one neighbor is 15, the other neighbor is 20, you don't have 10, you've got 17 and a half. So if you think there's problems with that, let us know. And the other comments that I've heard is some of the people have commented that it'd be good if we had some kind of a design book. And those are just my general summations of what I've heard.
Thank you, Tom. I think I tend to agree on a lot of the points.
Yeah, one question for you, Andrew and Mary, with it, right, that's footnote 1
Yeah.
on the, which is the averaging of the front setback of your neighbors on either side. Does that translate into the compliance model, or does that?
It does not.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
good question, but that's too tricky for them to.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Right. That's good. That actually sort of helps,
Yeah,
right?
right.
It's a way so that we set the actual zoning, but then in the real world, when someone goes to build something, there's a little more flexibility or more making sure that it fits in with the neighbors.
Right.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, that exists today across all zoning districts, I'm pretty sure, if not at least all the residential.
Yeah. All right. Any? I'm going to say last questions from the room. It's almost 10. It'd be great if it'd be like rare that we wrap up by 10 o'clock. So, but absolutely, any questions? I don't want to stifle any. All right. Hearing none.
All right. So I think, right, we'll try to summarize kind of what Tom just did. We'll try to summarize that in writing. And sorry, trying to see that in the chat area. Summarize everything we've heard in writing, considerations that we'll put together for these other concepts, run it through you guys and likely the public, and try to work from there.
All right. Were there questions in the chat?
No, she was saying thank you.
Okay. Cool. All right, so continue.
Motion, continue to the 12th.
Yeah, so I think we just want to make clear that like the continuation of the public hearing is essentially a formality, and that there'll be like a written document that wraps up this section of the public hearing, which we would most likely close and then reopen again ahead of the next town meeting that we would be taking this to. Doesn't necessarily mean the meetings are going to end, but this was part of the formal public hearing process to take the amendments to town meeting. So we have to, since we're not going to take them, we're going to close it and then continue the process.
But we're not going to close it tonight, right? We're going to
Right.
continue to the next.
We want to make sure we have a like written memo that documents everything that happened in it, and that that correctly summarizes what we heard, what we're going to do, the parameters of it, and that it exists for the public. People are gonna be like, what happened? What was the outcome? Yeah.
Right. Because we're probably not going to do meetings.
I have a question on that. So you'll close it, and then the 12th, you guys have like something, it's considered closed as the 12th, right? But then you're gonna open up, like, I guess, a new hearing?
Yeah, so.
Would follow?
Yeah, so we're closing this because it was set up to lead into town meeting, to this, April town meeting. Since we're not going to go to the April town meeting, we'll close this one, open up a new hearing because it's going to be in advance of.
It'll be based on the examples that we're now working.
Yes, yeah. So we'll sort of like close the chapter and then open another one right away. Good.
Yeah, no, you got it, yeah.
So motion to
continue the public hearing till March 12th?
You will technically have to do roll call.
Sorry, what?
February 12th? February 12th?
February 12th.
February 12th?
Oh, you mean next week?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I thought it would be next month.
Oh, we're rolling, Tony.
All right, did I hear a second?
I'll second.
All right. We'll start with, there's a roll call vote, so start with Hillary.
Hillary, tell me.
Oh, yeah.
Or Hillary, if you don't want, right?
Oh, could you unmute her? Does she need to unmute?
Where are you, Hillary?
Yes.
Thank you, Hillary.
Heather?
Yes.
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 John, yes.
Great. Thank you. then we
Do we need to move to adjourn? Motion to move to adjourn?
Yeah.
Unless there's any other business before the board.
Nope. I'm good.
Second, all those in favor?
4 of you can do that.
Good.
Roll call.
The 4 of you, I think, can do that.
Okay, majority. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Tom.